Undead are those who cannot die even after death. For immortals who escape the cycle of life and death, dominating one dimension was not difficult. It was only a matter of time before the dimension called Earth was conquered, or so they thought. But the reality turned out to be different. The skeleton put out his finger, pointing at something ahead, and shouted that this couldn't happen. He was dreaming. In the reflections of the flames and the roar of explosions, he saw a simple person. He could not survive there, but nevertheless, he was alive and well. The undead's answer was words coming from the wall of fire. Who knows how? Probably because he is stronger than any undead. A face distorted with a terrible smile emerged from the flames, and the iron fist slammed into the skull of the undead. It shattered into its component parts. The bones flew into the air. 2 years ago in the evening, a man stood in the middle of the room with his head down. The woman sternly told him that she allowed him to live here because he said he was looking for a job, and he spends his days just drinking and playing cards. If he continues to behave this way, then let him pack his things and go to his dad and mom. Kang Hyun was very upset. He can't rely on his parents at that age. The girl screamed that she, his little sister, was okay, and the guy has an allowance. Tomorrow is New Year. Let him find a part-time job or any other. Kang Hyun suggested we talk about this tomorrow. His head is spinning now. He went into his wretched room. It was unpleasant for him to hear screams outside the door. Sighing heavily, he fell onto the bed. He was pathetic and wondered why he lived like this. The only thing he achieved after arriving in Seoul was an internship at a large corporation. He needs to find a job in a warehouse or somewhere else. The computer screen flickered dimly in the dark room. Kang Hyun remembered that he forgot to turn off the game before leaving. He wondered how much better real life would be if it were a video game. There he would definitely be able to find a pretty decent job. A warrior, a wizard, a swordsman. His eyes slowly closed, he fell asleep. A minute later he was already fast asleep, without turning off his computer, the screen of which lit up with a strange glow and text appeared on the display. A common connection with the Haken dimension was discovered. Kang Hyun was fast asleep, and extraordinary events were unfolding around him in his room. The system reported that Earth's defenses were activated, and communication with the Haken dimension is temporarily prohibited. Training will begin on Earth. Kang Hyun suddenly opened his eyes and saw that his room and bed had disappeared, and he was sitting in a sparkling stream of lights. He widened his eyes, trying to figure out what the hell was going on here. Where was he? A screen appeared in front of him, but the words blurred before his eyes and he could not read anything. The system signaled that the time until full connection with the Haken dimension was 4 years, 364 days, 23 hours 59 minutes, 27 seconds, 26 seconds. Finally, the guy was able to read the words on the screen. Welcome to Mr. Kang Hyun's entry into teaching. There are 8 stages in total. Death in this place is not connected with reality. You can't give up halfway. If you fail, you can try again. When the training is completed, awakening and reward will come. Kang Hyun was sure that only severe gambling addicts in need of treatment could dream of such a thing. In despair, he covered his face with his hands. He mentally promised his sister Aiken that he would find a job. But on the other hand, this is just a dream. Maybe this is a sign to give it your all in the game for the last time. The guy's thinking was just another game. He perked up. The system announced the entrance to the first stage, and everyone believes that the guy's courage will save the Earth. Kang Hyun didn't quite understand what he was supposed to save. The first stage had already begun, and the guy had to prove his courage and defeat what he fears most. The conditions for passing are to reach the destination point at the end of the bridge. The condition for failure is death. At the same moment, the situation in front of the guy changed greatly. He just rolled his eyes. Where did he end up? People walked across thin stone bridges on a blazing ocean of lava. Kang Hyun stood on one of these bridges and felt the terrible heat from the boiling lava. Who are all these people? What's happening? He was definitely at home. What a stupid dream. The heat that engulfed his body showed that this was not a dream at all. On a nearby bridge, he noticed Kan Aiken, his sister. He asked her what the hell she was doing in his dream, and the girl replied that she was going to ask him the same thing. She doubted it was a dream. In her dream, they suddenly started talking about saving the Earth, and here she is. Kang Hyun sternly told her not to act like this was her dream. This was always his dream. The girl continued to doubt. How can lava be so hot in a dream? And how can you have natural conversations in your sleep? Something is wrong here. Kang Hyun laughed. The brain is easy to fool. People always say they don't feel pain in their sleep, but that's a lie. In his dreams, there were often cases when it seemed to him that he was peeing, but the next morning the bed was dry. The sister became convinced that her brother was an idiot. The guy decided to move forward and stepped on the narrow stone bridge with one foot. The conditions say that you need to reach the end of the bridge. If it is his dream that his sister cannot realize this, the girl got angry. She read it too. She held onto the wall and couldn't bring herself to take a step. Is your brother not afraid that he will fall? Kang Hyun noted that if he falls, he will wake up, that's all. At this time, a man flew down and could not stay on his bridge. He fell straight into the lava and died there with a terrible cry. Jurat and his sister watched in horror as a cloud of black smoke rose above the lava, all that was left of the man. Kang Hyun was speechless and didn't know what to do now. This scream sounded so realistic, but he's not scared at all. This was not true, he was very scared. Aiken finally made up her mind and advised her brother not to move on his feet. It's probably safer to crawl along the moto. Kang Hyun tried to argue with his sister and said that it would come to that. Achin knew that her brother was stubborn to the end. People moved across their bridges in different ways. Some even tried to run across the bridge. The brother and sister decided not to risk it and crawled. Aiken asked her brother what he thought happened to them. Any ideas? The guy stubbornly replied that this was just a very realistic nightmare that he was having. The sister was sure that Kang Hyun already understood everything. There are no such realistic dreams. She believed that there was definitely something here. Something they can't even imagine has happened. If they die here, then perhaps in real life too. They crawled along a narrow bridge over the burning ocean. Kang Hyun could not stand it and yelled at his sister. He tried not to pay attention, but she did not shut up, and he was trembling all over with fear. He lay down in the middle of the bridge. His legs and arms were shaking. He asked his sister to wait for him. She assumed that her brother would now simply lie down on his side, as he always preferred to sleep. The guy looked at his sister. There is a chance that this is a dream, so if he lies down comfortably, then there is a chance that he will wake up in his room. The system issued a message that a certain time had passed since the start of training and the difficulty was increasing. The brother and sister raised their heads in horror and listened to the strange sounds. Bridges began to collapse. Shards of stones flew. This was not the time to stand still. All that was left was to run, and the people on the bridges rushed to the opposite wall. Akin jumped to her feet and ran as fast as she could. Kang Hyun shouted after her to wait for him. He couldn't bring himself to get up. Finally, he ran after his sister, and behind them their bridges were falling apart into stone crumbs. Kang Hyun consoled himself with the fact that the bridge was not too narrow, and if he didn't trip, he would have time to reach the end. He just needs to look forward and walk this path. A wall was visible ahead. They're almost there. Finally, this task is over. He did it. Suddenly a crash was heard from above, and he saw that the roof of the cave was cracking above them. Kan Aiken looked up in horror. She did not have time to reach the wall. A little more and the stones from above will break the bridge, and she will fall into the lava. At the last moment, Kang Hyun jumped onto his sister's bridge and grabbed her. And in a jump he threw her and himself to the saving wall. At the same moment the bridge collapsed. Its fragments burned even before reaching the lava. The system informed about the new level, and congratulated you on completing the first stage. They temporarily awakened to receive their reward for completing it, and they will officially awaken when training ends. Kang Hyun collapsed on the ground. He was so tired that he could not lift a finger. Aiken tried to comprehend what she had just read. Her brother asked if she was going to thank him for saving her. Aiken said thank you in confusion. A window with Kan Aiken data popped up on the screen. Strength was 7, agility was 12, and a unique ability was calm. The girl did not understand what it was. Her brother perked up at the sight of the status window. This is the thing every man wants for his birthday. Such a window also appeared in front of him. He looked into it. His unique ability was resurrection. Suddenly everything flashed before his eyes, and he woke up screaming. He was sitting on the bed in his room where he fell asleep last night. Was it just a dream? The next morning, all social networks were filled with messages. Someone fell into an abyss in their sleep and died. The whole family had the same dream. They all died. What does it mean? The news reported that even the Supreme Leader experienced hell. A chat has opened for everyone who has unique abilities. The system window reported that a little less than 5 years remained until full connection with the Haken dimension. The next morning, brother and sister saw each other, and together remembered the details of last night. Where it was necessary to cross the bridge, Aiken almost died, and they came to the conclusion that it was not just a dream. They interrupted each other and shouted each their own. Finally they fell silent and buried themselves in the walls with their backs to each other. Then both, without saying a word, suggested having breakfast first. At breakfast, both looked at their phones and saw lists of ranks and news about an amazing dream. Aiken realized that this was not a simple dream, and not only in Korea, but all over the world that night people had the same dream. Kang Hyun also read the news and said that death in this dream does not affect reality. It is said that 3 or 4 out of 10 people fell, but there were no serious injuries. Aiken shuddered. It was still so realistic. Falling must hurt like hell. She heard that those who fell were really injured. And in general, is it normal for them to just sit and eat like that? And outside it seems like complete chaos is happening. Her brother replied that there was nothing they could do anyway. All that was left was to eat normally. He went to the window and pulled back the curtain. Is your sister going to plunge into this chaos outside? Outside, excited crowds grabbed supplies from boxes. They called for repentance, as the day of the Last Judgment had arrived. Stores were robbed and destroyed. Aiken confidently said that she and her brother would not be able to go outside. Kang Hyun agreed with her. If they go out now, they will only hurt themselves. He asked if Aiken remembered anything about the connection with the Haken dimension. The girl replied that it was said that they could check the remaining time before the temporary awakening. A system window opened in front of her. Kang Hyun also wanted to look at him. Nothing had changed. They had 5 years left. Kang Hyun looked out the window. Will people be able to prepare for such a situation in 5 years? There is chaos here now, but the situation will calm down soon. It's better to wait it out at home for now. In contrast to the chaos of the morning, nothing else of significance happened. By evening, most citizens returned to their daily lives. Thanks to this, stability was restored in Korea in just 1 day. And now the first day has come to an end. The system again invited Kang Hyun to study. He looked at his status window. Everything was the same as last night. He didn't know whether it was good or bad, because there was nothing to compare it with. Will he be able to use magic? The guy wasn't sure about this. But most of all, his attention was attracted by a unique ability, resurrection. This, according to Kang Hyun, was a very powerful superpower. The system window displayed the text that the ability to resurrect 24 hours after death, until the earth emerges from the crisis, is given to the guy. If the place of resurrection is not specified, it will occur in the last place of the dream. There are penalties that reduce the level of all abilities for 24 hours. Kang Hyun was delighted with this ability. He immediately agreed to go to the second stage of training. Like a miracle resurrector, what can he do? Before the start of the second stage, Kang Hyun was very excited about having the resurrection skill. No idea what will happen next. Right now he was fighting a huge goblin. The guy was armed with a heavy club, which was already covered in blood. Before coming here, he read that he must defeat all enemies and prove his skill. As an experienced gamer, he thought it could be combat since the system is similar to a game. And I was not mistaken. After a short battle, he cut off the goblin's head. Kang Hyun managed to take down the monster with a surprise attack using his mace, but the feeling of hitting a living creature made him tremble. It was the first time he had killed, and he felt like he was going to throw up. He knew he only won because it was a goblin, and the guy attacked him unexpectedly. Another monster with glowing eyes was looking at him from behind the wall. Kang Hyun jumped back and raised his mace. A stink goblin was approaching him with a huge cleaver in his hands. Kang Hyun realized that there were 2 goblins from the very beginning. Aren't goblins supposed to be a low-level mob for newbies? This one is much bigger than the one he killed, and the cleaver in his hands is more than 1 meter. You can die from such a blow. The goblin roared and rushed to attack the guy. Kang Hyun could only defend himself and retreat. The guy had a body chronically deprived of physical activity due to long-term unemployment, and the mace, the weapon he chose at the beginning of his training, was only 70 centimeters in length. The goblin knocked the mace out of Kang Hyun's hands, and he was left unarmed. Of course, his weapon could not withstand a meter-long cleaver. The goblin inflicted several wounds on the guy. He wondered why he had to go through this. Instead of killing the guy, the goblin dragged him along, grabbing him by the collar. Kang Hyun couldn't wait for him to finally wake up. Anyone please save. How much blood is there in the human body? Kang Hyun didn't realize this until his own blood was shed. The slowly approaching fear of death tightened coldly around his neck, and the agony that he endured for several hours until his breathing stopped. It was a merciless torture inflicted by 4 goblins. He woke up screaming wildly. His hair stood on end. On shaking legs, he ran out of his room. He had a very bad headache. Why is this crap happening again? Sestar poured him coffee, and he told her about what he had experienced that night. Aiken also died that night, but everything was not at all as her brother said. It's clear why he was crying. She asked if he needed to go to the hospital. The news said that the number of visitors to the psychiatric ward had doubled in the last 2 days. Many people must have had similar experiences. Kang Hyun didn't think he needed medical attention. Besides, he had no money. His sister advised him to earn money. But there was also good news. If Kang Hyun died, then his training seems to be over. People who died in the first stage never dreamed of the second stage. Kang Hyun sighed in relief. Today he will be able to sleep more peacefully. But the system responded with a message intended specifically for him. An error occurred at the second stage. Training continues. Immediate transition. May his courage save the earth. The guy was already warped by such news. Training stage 2, round 2 begins. Under the guy's incessant obscene screams, he fell into a black abyss. The system reported that since he was undergoing training, there would be no penalty for resurrection. He woke up in a dark cave. He passed out, fell asleep for several hours. He thought he would wake up in his bed, but this did not happen. He wanted to die, but he understood that even if he died, everything would happen again. He realized that he would have to do what they wanted from him. Besides, Kang Hyun was hungry. He stood up and went to choose his weapon. Last time he chose his mace. He chose it because it seemed simpler in terms of destructive power and use, but the close combat did not work out for him. Kang Hyun was wondering whether it was better to choose a bow or a crossbow, and for close combat, a spear is better than a sword. Finally he made his choice, spear and crossbow. Having gone to the rear of the goblins, Kang Hyun was going to show them the shooting skills of the South Korean reservist. He took aim with the crossbow and fired. The arrow flew between the goblins. One jumped away and the second turned to the guy. The monster's eyes burned with a terrible fire. This was Kang Hyun's plan. The goblins rushed towards him, and he deftly lifted the monster that ran first, not a spear. His plan worked. There is one less monster. Now all that remains is to deal with the second goblin, but the spear is stuck in the body of the dead goblin. The huge monster jumped up and attacked the unarmed Kang Hyun from above, and again the guy woke up in his room screaming. He was glad that this time he died quickly and without suffering. In the evening, the system reported that everything was starting all over again, and Kang Hyun gladly sent her away. Training, second stage, third round. Today's weapons are sword and shield. But wouldn't it be better to use the weapon he had already used? No. Let there be a sword. Kang Hyun spent the entire day studying on video. He went out to the bastards and prepared to attack. And he woke up again in his bed. These creatures attacked him. He was unable to react. Aiken looked into his room. The brother laughed hysterically. I'll have to try again. He sent the system with its stupid messages about courage and saving the earth. The fourth round has begun. At first he just waved his sword aimlessly, because judging by the status window, this is the standard method. System reported that his stamina increases by 1 due to his efforts to overcome his limits. Statistics increase due to efforts. Does he really have to swing a sword for 8 hours to level up? The status window is opened. Stamina 8, magical power 14, additional skills 1. Kang Hyun thought about it. He got it all when he passed the first stage. He invested 1 point in strength. With a total of 2 points, he planned to take revenge on the goblins. But he was too exhausted, so he couldn't take down a single one and died immediately. He woke up screaming again in his room. How it bothered him. Fifth round. Stamina increased by 1 from working with a sword. The result is death and awakening. Sixth round. Strength increased by 1 after 10 hours of training. Now it became easier to deal with 2 goblins. But Kang Hyun fundamentally lacked physical strength and combat abilities, and he could not cope with the rest. In the 7th round he simply swung his sword. And he began to swing it until the system showed that his stamina was increasing by 1 due to the fact that Kang Hyun was trying to go beyond his limits. The guy fell to the ground exhausted. A status window opened in front of him. Basic fencing created. It helps correct posture and distribute force when swinging a sword, allowing you to strike more effectively. This is a fencing skill used by local bandits, but it's better than nothing at all. It looks like the system was bullying Kang Hyun, but he was very happy. He did it. Today will be the end of the damned green bastards. In the second stage of training, there are 5 damn goblins. 2 are at the beginning of the fortress, and 3 are in the second half of the forest. The first 2 were simple. Kang Hyun unexpectedly attacked the first monster with a crossbow, and then dealt with the third with a sword. The problem was the 3 remaining in the forest. Kang Hyun dealt with the 2 just as he did with the first. But the last one became a real test. Kang Hyun fought the goblin with all his might. The goblin attacked very quickly and strongly, but Kang Hyun saw his attacks, and he felt that his body could react even before the guy thought about it. He deftly dodged the monster's blows. This was the effect of the basic swordsmanship that he received, although the description of this effect irritated Kang Hyun greatly. He attacked the goblin with his sword. The sword whistled close to the monster's neck, but he managed to dodge. There was one more problem. Kang Hyun was already exhausted and had lost a lot of stamina while fighting the 4 goblins. The monster swung his battle axe, deflecting Kang Hyun's blow, and he knocked my guy out of his hands. The sword flew far back and stuck into the ground. Kang Hyun stood in front of the goblin completely unarmed. The goblin swung his axe, but the guy leaned back and avoided the fatal blow. The monster was in no hurry to kill the enemy. He played with him like a cat with a mouse, but Kang Hyun perfectly calculated the enemy's movements. They were obvious to him. He rushed to his sword. On the way, he grabbed a stone and heartily hit the green monster in the face. The goblin growled, revealing sharp teeth. He was blinded by the blow and waved his arms randomly in the hope of catching the man. Kang Hyun quickly went behind his opponent and called out to him. There was a stone clutched in the guy's hand. The monster turned around and Kang Hyun hit him on the head with a stone. Blood sprayed and the goblin began to fall on his back. Finally, it was his turn to die. Kang Hyun is the strongest here. The system congratulated him on passing the second stage. He received an additional 5 statuses as a reward. And now he can choose a weapon. He has the shield skill unlocked and the basic crossbow skill. Kang Hyun was overjoyed. He won. He now has the power of a supreme being, and everyone else is just cheap. The next morning, on the occasion of passing the second stage, Kang Hyun decided to cook breakfast. During breakfast, he heard a strange sound. Haken ran out of her room at this sound. The display window indicated that Earth's training had been completed, and Kang Hyun was now free to use the system outside of training. Kang Hyun and his sister were stunned to read the text and didn't know what it was. The dungeon is now activated. They hurried to the exit and opened their eyes wide in surprise. A door appeared right in front of their house, shrouded in a strange glow. Is this a dungeon? Sietsema announced that the dungeons can only be used by the awakened. Such doors have appeared in many cities around the world. Awakened must complete the dungeon within a certain time. After the introduction of dungeons, the world became more chaotic. At first, Kang Hyun and his sisters decided not to leave the house. They looked and organized the information. Kang Hyun found out that the training was not quite over yet. Recently, those who have just turned 18 have joined him. Akin read that the comments section was in chaos. People think it's a hasty decision to call those who have been trained awakened and send them out to clear dungeons. Kang Hyun tried to open the status window on his own. The window opened, but said that the training was not yet completed, and he could not do it at will. The guy learned that there are 8 stages in training. When he tried to pass the second stage after 7 attempts, others had already completed their training. Is there really no other way but to go through all the stages? He turned to his sister with a request to find information about the third stage. The girl replied that there is no such information. Even very little is said about the second stage. Kang Hyun didn't know whether he should go fight in the third stage. But now he is stronger than ever, and will not suffer a shameful defeat as before. He will tackle the third stage with style and precision. Night came and the third stage of training came. There's a monster rushing towards Kang Hyun right now. The guy is sure that he will kill this bastard. At the third stage, you need to prove your instability and patience by enduring any situation. The victory condition is to destroy the Gurkha leader. The condition for failure is death. Advice: if you wait a long time, the opportunity will eventually appear. Kang Hyun was given a camouflage suit that captured the imagination of men. The guy understood that the new task should be something like liquidation. A monster that Kang Hyun has never heard of. He must be killed. First, you need to find him in this dark forest. To begin with, he decided to check what he received for completing the second stage. Abilities were added: fencing, crossbow, shield, strength increased to 10, agility to 11, endurance to 11. Kang Hyun didn't expect everything to be so good. This is what the status window should look like. The skill descriptions were still annoying. The basic crossbow skill advised that sometimes it is better not to get into a fight, but just shoot in the back like a coward. Kang Hyun decided to invest extra points in strength and endurance, and I wondered whether it was worth adding points to agility. Satima asked him if the guy wanted to check his inventory. In the inventory there was only a sword, which the system called worn, and Kang Hyun immediately pulled him out. It was the most amazing thing the guy had seen so far. It's already dawn. The check is completed. It's time to look for this Gorkha. Carlos Haskok, the legendary Marine Corps sniper who killed an enemy general after crawling 14 kilometers over several days, became the man Kang Hyun respected the most from this day forward. Kang Hyuk himself has been crawling for more than 10 hours and has almost crawled to the spot. Near the settlement, 2 guards are on alert. Maybe it's better to just break through by force. But the guy doubted that he would succeed. The security looked very menacing. The grass is prickly. All sorts of bugs crawl in it. One of the guards was approaching the place where Kang Hyun was hiding. It was incredible, but he couldn't find another place to take a leak. The guy must endure. The notice said he must be patient and persistent. But for this, Kang Hyuk decided that he would cut off the guy's head and jumped out of the ambush. Like a bulldozer, he smashed into the settlement guard and swung his sword. The soldier flew back, unable to withstand such pressure. Kang Hyun was glad that he killed him, but that was not the case. The guard rose to his feet, and with his scream he woke up the entire settlement. People with torches in their hands ran from all sides, and Kang Hyun found himself surrounded. The guy decided that since he was in complete shit anyway, he would at least say the phrase that he had always dreamed of saying. He shouted to the whole forest, "Come on, attack me, you damn bastards!" The system reported that a skill had been created, Lion's Roar of Fury. It all ended sadly. The hero was killed. In the second round, Kang Hyun was ready for this outcome and drew conclusions. The lion's roar of rage reduced the combat effectiveness of enemies, aroused fear in them, and removed all moral prohibitions from the one who uses the roar of rage. After crawling for 10 hours in the first round, he realized that Gurkha warriors go out hunting during the day and return to the village at sunset. In other words, only boys remain among the men in the Denma village, which are easy to deal with. He quickly made his way to the leader's house and ran into it. Now he will quickly kill the leader and will be free. The leader was sitting on the throne. It seemed like he was waiting for Kang Hyun. The leader was surrounded by a lilac glow. He extended his hand. This radiance enveloped Kang Hyun, and the system notified that the guy was under the influence of the low-level magic containment skill. Kang Hyun's body didn't move. The guy was indignant. What kind of training is this in which there is magic? There must be some way around it. He remembered his lion's roar of fury and immediately used it. Blue lights of power rushed from him towards the leader. The magic has dissipated. With the charging sword above his head, Kang Hyun flew up to the leader's throne and delivered the decisive blow. His great plan worked, and the system congratulated the guy on completing the third stage. He received intermediate physical regeneration and the temporary title of Unshakable, which was awarded to the rebel who completed the third stage the fastest. Kang Hyun was pleased that he completed the third stage in just 2 days. In comparison, with the second stage taking a week, this is a huge improvement. With his height, he wondered if it could be that he was a genius. At this rate, he will be able to complete the fourth stage in just a few minutes. He imagined himself in shining armor, standing on the corpse of a terrible monster. That's what he thought a month ago. 25 days have passed since the dispatch of a special squad of awakened ones to clear the dungeon. It was announced that 40% of the dungeons discovered within the country had been cleared. Meanwhile, the awakened continue to participate in purges. And in response to this, the government is considering the issue of paying bonuses. Aiken was preparing breakfast and listening to her brother's enthusiastic screams from his room. If this goes on, the neighbors will file a complaint. Did he get hit in the head with an arrow? A disheveled Kang Hyun left the room and said that he had killed everyone. Aiken reminded him how he went crazy and shouted that he couldn't do it. She put the food on the table and looked at her brother. What happened in his dream? Why has he been acting like this since the morning? Kang Hyun responded gloomily that this training was getting on his nerves. The sister noticed that his face already looked like the face of a criminal. Kang Hyun advised her to speak more politely to him. He is her older brother. She asked how the fourth stage went, and Kang Hyun replied that it was something like a group project. It was necessary to show leadership qualities or something like that. The quest was to lead the group to destroy the dungeon core. It was like a role-playing game. Group members performed their assigned roles. The group did not have enough supplies to continue the mission recklessly. Despite strong opposition from the two couples, the decision was eventually made to move forward. Of course, Kang Hyun did a great job at first. He boosted morale with Roar of Fury and occupied the front lines with the healing power of intermediate body regeneration. Aiken asked if everything was in order. What took him a whole month? Kang Hyun became gloomy. The problem started that night. The two idiots were supposed to take turns on duty, but instead they decided to run away together. When Kang Hyun caught them, they killed him. He knew this from the very beginning, ever since they decided to make love in the sacred dungeon. In any case, the same characters and similar situations were repeated in every episode. And in the end, Kang Hyun found a way out with the help of his brilliant mind. The sister looked at her brother incredulously. He said he decided to just kill all the annoying pests and move on. At the last episode of the fourth stage, disagreements began in the group. Some suggested moving forward. Others believed that this was not worth doing with a limited supply of food. What if they can't find the core? There is enough income from magic stones. If they die, Kang Hyun will be responsible. Kang Hyun suddenly became furious. From now on, everyone will follow his instructions. If they resist, they will die. And even if they complain, they will also die. One of the guys called Kang Hyun crazy, and then he got punched in the face. Kang Hyun started beating him, and said that he told everyone to be silent and not complain. Everyone should follow him because he knows the way. There were dangers along the way. Skeletons attacked a group of people, but Kang Hyun dealt with everyone. The group was shocked. He really took out all the hitters. They stood in the middle of the hall all alone. A core was burning in the middle between the pillars. Kang Hyun decided to simply destroy the pillar. He swung his sword and the pillars scattered. The system congratulated the guy on completing the fourth stage. As a reward, he received the technique, 1 hit, 2 halves, and a ring of strong mind. Considering the results, the increase in the fourth stage was not bad. Ability statistics grew exponentially. not to mention the many items that monsters dropped. Among them, Kang Hyun still did not know the purpose of the magic stone. But if you stock up on everything, you can eventually find a use for it. The one hit, two halves skill and ring of strong mind were also quite good. But the most important thing was that Kang Hyun became quite strong in reality. It seemed to him that weight training had become less effective, and it was time to go to the gym. At this time, an emergency notification came to the guy's phone. The Department of Homeland Security reported the opening of a dungeon in their area. Residents were urged to be careful and advised to stay at home. Cries for help could be heard from the street. The goblins broke out and killed everyone who got in their way. If the dungeon is not cleared, its gates will be open. Kang Hyun suddenly remembered that his sister had gone to work and was now in danger. He needed to find some kind of weapon and ran to the kitchen. There wasn't even a simple sword in the house. But then his gaze fell on the knife lying in the sink. Armed with a knife, he ran out into the street where the goblins were rampaging. They noticed the guy. As expected, Kang Hyun was unable to use the skills just yet. But he attracted the attention of the monsters. They rushed at the guy, making incoherent sounds. There was no guarantee that the goblins would be the same level as in training, but Kang Hyun could already tell their level from their movements. He began to fight off the monsters with a knife, and did it successfully. The goblins, bleeding, fell onto the asphalt. Kang Hyun decided that he would put his knife to good use. In the office where Aiken worked, employees barricaded the door, behind which the roar of monsters could be heard. People were scared and were waiting for help. There was some kind of fuss behind the door. The door was shaking. People did not know what awaited them. Suddenly the barricade shattered, and the door gave way and flew out. Standing on the threshold was Kang Hyun, who said that he didn't want to break the door. He shouted to his sister that her older brother had come to save her. The girl's employees could not come to their senses. Who is this terrible guy? Aiken froze in surprise. The head of the office shouted that the guy broke the barricade and what to do now. Monsters will tear everyone apart. Kang Hyun laughed embarrassedly. He apologizes. There was no way to control the power. But people don't have to worry anymore. The entire corridor was littered with the corpses of monsters. Kang Hyun suggested that the office workers arm themselves by taking the weapons from the dead goblins. He is confident that if no one panics, they can defeat everyone. And he got ready to leave. On the way here, he saw that there were more goblins, and he decided to check the upper floors of the building. You need to do this to sleep peacefully today. At the end of the day, everyone stayed in the office. Aiken washed and bandaged her brother's wounds. If he is so tough, then why was he beaten like that? The brother replied that he had not yet learned to evade. His recovery ability is amazing and he can withstand most attacks, but he can't use his skills. His sister advised him to be careful. If he cannot use the skills, then he will not be able to resurrect. His decision to deal with the monsters in the entire building was excessive. Yeah, it was cool until he got beat up so bad. Night fell and the 5th stage of training began. Kang Hyun stood in the forest and read the conditions, to prove his wisdom, capable of overcoming any difficulties. He stood surrounded by girls who were trying to figure out which of them was a succubus. The conditions of the stage were to defeat a succubus disguised as a human. Those who recognize the essence of the monster will become victims first. Kang Hyun thought about it. Isn't a succubus a demon of dreams, a creature that appears in a dream and sucks a person's life force? They are known to be very beautiful, but all the women here are beautiful, and everyone knows about the existence of a succubus. At this time, a charming girl approached the guy and asked what he thought about all this. He replied lightheartedly that he had no ideas yet. The ring of a strong mind resisted the girl's charms. This ring gave immunity to all effects of mental magic. The group set up camp and lit a fire. Kang Hyun sat by the fire and thought. The first stage is the Inferno Circus. The second stage is a week-long battle with goblins. At the third stage, after crawling for 10 hours, he was pissed on by a warrior. At the fourth stage, a month-long group project from hell awaited him. But now he can enjoy interesting things. He remembered that he had to control his facial expression so as not to become a victim of the monster. The guy covered his face with his hand. If she realizes that he guessed, then he will be finished. A succubus can disguise itself as a human. It is a powerful creature. You can't act rashly. Since a man can fall under the influence of a succubus, he needs a woman to help him. He decided to go to bed and think about everything tomorrow. He opened his eyes and recognized the ceiling of Akin's office. Not expecting this, he jumped up with a wild cry. The people told him that they were just about to wake him up when the army finally arrived. Kang Hyun was beside himself with anger. The succubus noticed that he recognized her and killed him in his sleep. Heavy army vehicles drove through the streets. Heavily armed soldiers jumped to the ground, and they started shooting the monsters. Kang Hyun watched this from the office window. The army has really arrived. Now the people are safe. As expected, the monsters cannot do anything against the weapons of the military. But Kang Hyun felt that this was not the end. It constantly seemed to him that there was great danger ahead. The soldiers continued to kill monsters, but there were no fewer of them. One of the goblins walked towards people despite heavy fire. He swung and killed a soldier in his path. This goblin was still walking and his roar was filling my ears. The soldiers tried to start the car and retreat, but the goblin attacked from a jump, swinging his spear. People died instantly. The remaining cars did not have time to brake and crashed into one another. Kang Hyun watched through the window as panic began among the military. Nobody knew what to do now. The monster jumped into the back and began to deal with people. Then the monster raised its head and looked straight at the guy. The system reported that this monster is a hobgoblin. The soldiers were informed by radio that the 3rd detachment had been hit. Corporal Young Jae-hoon sent a signal for help. At this time, he saw a monster who was already about to dine on them. He asked the radio operator what happened to the reinforcements. The radio operator replied that they had sent one capable civilian. The corporal had a hard time comprehending the news, and he decided that he had gone crazy. At this time, the goblin attacked the military vehicle. The soldier opened fire on the monster, but the golem seemed invulnerable to shots. He swung his halberd, but he didn't have time to strike. A stone slab flew into the goblin's face. He flew back several meters and fell to the ground. While Corporal Jung was taking stock of the situation, Kang Hyun climbed into the car and asked if everything was okay. He understands that it is not easy for soldiers in such a situation. The guy didn't look very attractive. The corporal decided that there was a new monster in front of him and pointed his weapon at him. Kang Hyun shouted at him not to shoot. "He's a man, isn't it clear?" The corporal thought that the volunteer certainly looked strong, and he apologized to the guy for his behavior. He was not himself. He just escaped death. He thanks the guy for his help. Kang Hyun no longer listened to him. He looked at the monster who was already rising to his feet. This is happening again. The bastard is clearly looking Kang Hyun in the eye. If the army was destroyed, these monsters would come to the office where Achin worked. Kang Hyun shouted to the corporal not to shoot, and armed with a knife, rushed to deal with the monster. He asked the corporal if they had tear gas. The corporal replied that there were and almost all operational weapons were loaded. Kang Hyun asked to give him one. The corporal was very surprised. Kang Hyun didn't have time to explain his decision. The corporal only advised him to take a gas mask. As he ran, Kang Hyun shouted to Karpal to make sure that there would be no shooting at Kang Hyun. If the military does anything wrong, it's all over for them. Aiken looked from the window at what was happening and heard the corporal's command for everyone to put on gas masks and be on alert. Shoot only at approaching monsters, and never turn your weapon towards the center of the street. Kang Hyun was approaching the goblin. He hated him and all other monsters. The goblin growled menacingly. One of the soldiers threw a tear gas canister at the monster. The monster coughed. Tears flowed from his eyes and he saw nothing in the clouds of gas. Kang Hyun covered his face with the sleeve of his jacket and, squeezing his knife, approached the enemy. Even though he was a goblin, even though he was a hobgoblin, his weakness was clear to the guy. He deflects the bullets, but this is the first time the monster has felt pain. While the hobgoblin's tolerance for pain is quite high, Kang Hyun's is even higher. The guy rushed to attack the monster. First, we need to confiscate his weapons. The goblin's halberd jumped out of his hand, unable to withstand the blow of Kang Hyun's blade. The guy then attacked the goblin and was surrounded by a glow of power. Corporal Chan looked at the fight and thought that an awakened one was fighting a monster. A surprised voice came from behind him. The man who appeared in the car said in surprise that he believed that he alone was sent to help the military. Kang Hyun continued to fight with the goblin and was thrown back by his blow. He expected that he would not be able to cause much damage to the monster, but he was unable to harm it at all. If this continues, Kang Hyun's stamina will only decline. The guy understood that the only thing he could do now was cut the monster. At this time, a flash of flame surrounded the goblin and someone began to strike him with strong blows. It was the awakened one who was sent to help who entered the battle. In a few moments, he severely wounded the monster with his sword. But the most awakened one had the feeling that he was hitting a stone with a sword, and not the body of a goblin. He determined that the hobgoblin was only an F-rank dungeon boss, but his defense is abnormally strong. Kang Hyun rushed to help the awakened one. This creature has weak points. The fight continued. Kang Hyun's stamina was declining, and his physical strength was not that great. Even though the goblin was wounded, the damage done to him was very small. The sword and knife of the people could not finish him off. They needed weapons. Kang Hyun's gaze fell on the halberd thrown away by the golem. The awakened one shouted to the guy that he did not have enough strength to deliver the decisive blow. He asked him to attack the monster's vital area, while the awakened one held him back. Kang Hyun wondered where this bastard's vital weak spots are. Behind the knee, the skin is thinner there. In desperation, he lunged with his halberd wherever it hit. Blood splashed. The goblin lost his menacing appearance and his eyes bulged. The awakened one was also numb with surprise when he saw how the formidable enemy crouched down. The halberd stuck straight into the monster's backside. Kang Hyun also did not expect such an effect and apologized. For some reason, he felt sorry for the goblin. At that moment, when an unpleasant sensation swept through the hilt of the halberd, a philosophical question flashed through Kang Hyun's head. Is the anus a vital point? The guy doubted that this was the most vital place, the defeat of which could lead to immediate death. The decision was made in an instant, and Kang Hyun's body was already performing the next movement. He lifted the goblin impaled on the point upward, and with force he brought him down to the ground. A monster cannot be made of stone on the inside either. Foam began to flow from the mouth of the defeated monster. He couldn't get up, and Kang Hyun did not stop hitting him. The monster's blood was spilled. The guy finally found his weak spot. While he dealt with the monster, the awakened one stood motionless and looked in amazement at what was happening. Where did such an experienced fighter come from? Is he not registered? How strong is he? Kang Hyun did not suspect that he had made a strong impression on the awakened one. Near the killed monster, he discovered a strange object. The system said that it would not provide information about the subject because Kang Hyun had not yet completed his studies. The guy mentally cursed the training, but decided to take the subject just in case. It might come in handy. An awakened one approached him and said something. Kang Hyun remembered that items found in monsters should be shared with partners, but this guy just appeared in the middle of the battle, and Kang Hyun dealt with the goblin almost single-handedly. So he went to hell. He threw the goblin's halberd to the awakened one, and shouting that he had urgent business, and the guy could keep the weapon, he ran away. Kang Hyun was in a great mood. The awakened one was speechless from such a quick disappearance of the guy. The smoke from the tear gas cleared. The awakened man took off his gas mask and wondered who this man was. A few hours after defeating the hobgoblin, as dusk fell, the situation seemed to calm down a little. Kang Hyun and his sister walked through streets that looked like ruins from a disaster movie, and they were able to return home only after it became dark around. When Kang Hyun ran away, he forgot to close the door and now their apartment was trashed. The sister realized that her brother never grew up. He was still an idiot. The two of them cleaned up and sat down to dinner. Aiken was browsing social media and suddenly let out a loud scream. Then she showed her brother the video on her phone. On the screen, he famously dealt with the hobgoblin. Kang Hyun couldn't believe his own eyes. Apparently, someone took a video from the windows of the building. The comments made Kang Hyun happy. Some really didn't believe that it was real, and everything shown was computer graphics. But mostly the audience admired the hero's courage. True, some noted that he has a villainous face. Kang Hyun went to his room and went to bed. He remembered the fight scene with the hobgoblin. The guy who came to his aid was very cool. I wonder how many stages he went through. Kang Hyun himself was supposed to be eliminated in the second stage. But there's no point in thinking about it now. He is going to go through all 8 stages and become the strongest. Yesterday's succubus was very beautiful. Despite the fact that she killed him, he wants to meet her again. He again found himself in the clearing with his eyes closed. He was looking forward to meeting the beautiful monster. But reality was very different from the dream. A goblin's face appeared in front of Kang Hyun. The guy almost got a heart attack from this sight. And then he knocked out the goblin. What the hell? Where are the goblins from? The system window provided information that the conditions for passing were to evade a horde of cave goblins and clear the dungeon. And she gave advice. Cave goblins have poor eyesight, but excellent hearing. We need to find a way to distract them. While Kang Hyun was reading all the conditions, he was already surrounded by monsters. But he was interested to know why the conditions for passing the stage had changed. This was not what he expected when he fell asleep. Why has everything changed? The next morning, the awakened one, whom we had already met, beat up the office staff. He asked how could someone who hasn't even participated in training yet be stronger than ability users. Training Stage 5, Round 3. The conditions for passing are to defeat a double monster that hides among people and eats them every night. Tip: Paladins and mages can use a unique ability once a day. Kang Hyun stood in a group of people and read a message on the system window that opened. The rest discussed the conditions of passage. It wasn't like finding a succubus in the first round. Suddenly it dawned on Kang Hyun. This is a mafia game. You need to use wisdom to get through it. He used Furious Roar and ordered everyone to gather. From now on, the one who moves becomes guilty. However, he forgot that in the mafia game, usually the chattiest ones die first. He woke up again in his bed. If you think about it, he never won at mafia and was one of the first to drop out. But he didn't expect this. He felt hungry and decided to go to the kitchen. He never thought that he would repeat the same failure for a month and a half. Unrecognizable Kang Hyun stood in front of his sister and was glad that her big brother was so cleverly reborn. Suit, glasses, book in hands. He's unrecognizable. Oken was already warped by the sight of his brother. The guy said that he tried to change his appearance in order to change internally. The sister did not appreciate her brother's efforts. She sincerely asked him not to engage in nonsense, and he was upset. Kang Hyun thought this was the perfect cover. The sister sighed helplessly. The idea that glasses make a guy smarter is ridiculous. He holds the book upside down, and the suit is too small for him. Costume. Where did he get it? They don't have any money anyway. Why does she need such a brother? I'd rather spend the money on food. She'll definitely go crazy with him. Kang Hyun yelled that 53 days had already passed. He died so many times at that damn 5th stage. He must do something. The conditions of the task are to win with the help of wisdom, and the scene changes every time. Even the smartest people can't solve this problem. My sister would rather transplant someone else's brain into this idiot than wait for him to wise up. The 5th stage of training continued, and Kang Hyun found himself in a dungeon. He looked gloomily out the system window. What kind of crap had she prepared this time? But the task inspired him, and an idea came to mind. The conditions for passing are to completely clear the tarantula incubator dungeon. Find the weak points of the spitting tarantula and develop an appropriate strategy. The tarantula was nearby and was about to spit at the uninvited guest. The conditions were simple and understandable, and the guy rushed to attack. Finally, he found a solution to the problem. At this time, the tarantula spat. Sticky mucus enveloped Kang Hyun's body. He didn't read the terms carefully and forgot that this spider spits. His hand turned black. The guy thought with horror that the spider was also poisonous. This was already too much. Grabbing the sword with his good hand, he began to swing it in all directions, trying to hit the monster. He ducked under the monster's belly, and he wounded him with a sword. The sword was stained with the blood of the monster. The system gave a hint that the lead to the tarantula's weak points was hidden in the incubator. In the end, Kang Hyun decided to break through with brute force. Weaknesses. Tips. It doesn't matter, the main thing is to kill. Instead of looking for the key, he will break the door. The monster was defeated. The system congratulated him on completing the 5th stage. His reward will be the strength of a giant. She strengthens the muscles with magical powers. Kang Hyun thought that only those with bad bodies needed brains. In one of the schools in Seoul, Kwon Min-soo did not pay attention to the jokes of his classmates. He was already exhausted after this damn training. He had recently turned 18, and his younger comrades were interested in how he got through the 1st stage. The guy replied that the rumors were true. The stage was terrible. But the hardest part is yet to come. On social networks, they say that only passing the 4th stage allows you to enter the top 1%, and there is no information about the 5th stage at all. They're probably cheating on information. New rumors have appeared that someone who passed the 7th stage yesterday is going to the 8th. The boys read, "The theme of the 4th stage is leadership. Conquer all party members with strength. In the 5th stage, wisdom is important, but muscles are the highest form of wisdom. You need to increase your strength. At the 6th stage, villainy. You must destroy enemies and allies. At the 7th stage, devotion. You can only destroy enemies." Who writes these tips? The author of the messages was ridiculed in the comments. He's lying all the time. He's a loser who hasn't passed a single stage. Kang Hyun almost went crazy with anger. He goes out of his way to share his experiences with people, but they make fun of him. He complained to his sister that he had revealed his learning strategy, but they didn't believe him. My sister is tired of his screams, but Kang Hyun assured her that when he passed the 8th stage, he would become the 3rd graduate to study in Korea. Will rise to the same level as Han Sa-young, the leader of the Dangun Guild, or Choi Dong-woo, the president of the Ability User Alliance. Sestar asked how he could compare himself to geniuses who went through everything in one go. He spent a lot of time on this. Her brother reminded her that he passed the 6th and 7th stages on the first try. The reward for the 6th stage was the weapon Bilan's longsword, which gave berserker skills, and for the 7th, Ronald's armor, which could repair itself. If you complete the 8th stage, then all rewards can be used in reality through the inventory. And Kang Hyun also wanted to check the item that fell out of the hobgoblin. At the 8th stage, the system asked the guy an unexpected question. What are his beliefs? He stood barefoot in an empty space, with only the display window in front of him. Before he had time to answer the question that puzzled him, the walls of space began to crack. The floor underneath was also covered in cracks. And with a cry, Kang Hyun flew into the dark abyss. The flight suddenly stopped. Kang Hyun stood on the street of a crowded city. He was trying to figure out where he was, when suddenly a girl walking towards him. She approached him closely and walked through him, without even blocking anything in its path. Kang Hyun wondered, is he now shapeless like a ghost? The city appeared in training for the first time. Perrin thought that this was an earthly city after all. Residents of the city walked towards him. At first glance they looked normal, but when they came closer to the guy, it became clear that these were not people. The inhabitants of this city were more like lizards. Life in the city went on as usual. Office workers drank coffee, mothers took their children to school. Kang Hyun noticed one alien who was looking intently at the guy. Kang Hyun suspected that he could see him. He seemed so stunned. But after a second, Kang Hyun realized that the passerby's attention was not focused on him. From the hole that opened behind Kang Hyun, monsters poured into the street. Residents of the city ran screaming. A peaceful street turned into a nightmare. Monsters caught and killed people. Among the monsters, there were those that Kang Hyun had already encountered, but there were also those that he had seen for the first time. This was a completely different level compared to what he experienced in the dungeons. These monsters looked like a scene from the apocalypse. The system reminded that a little more than 4 years remained until full connection with the Hakan dimension. Kang Hyun realized what the Earth would look like after this conjunction. He was standing on the street with his head down when suddenly a shadow fell on the ground. He raised his head and saw a huge monster that towered over the skyscrapers and obscured the sky. The giant leaned down and extended his hand. Kang Hyun saw huge fingers above him and covered himself with his hands. At that moment, when it seemed all was over, he was transported into empty space. Someone asked him a question. What did he feel? Kang Hyun was floating in space among the stars, and opposite him, a shadowy figure was forming from the light. The guy asked if God was talking to him or something like that. The figure replied that he was not a god, but rather a dimensional administrator. Kang Hyun tried to comprehend the information and froze. The administrator said that at this stage, Kang Hyun will have a personal conversation with him, and the guy can ask him about anything that interests him. The administrator will in turn ask Kang Hyun questions. The guy immediately asked what he just saw, and will the Earth be the same in 5 years? The administrator replied that it depends on what people do next. Kang Hyun objected indignantly. If such a powerful being is in front of him, then why doesn't he stop this situation himself? The administrator is not a guardian. His task is not to protect but to maintain balance. The best he can do is give people a window of status and training. It was the administrator's turn to ask questions, and he asked Kang Hyun what beliefs guided him, and why did he survive until now. The guy didn't understand at all why such deep questions. After observing people after this event, the administrator became curious. All intelligent beings are interesting, but people especially. Kang Hyun was infuriated by this. This fucking administrator was a bad watcher. No one around Kang Hyun lives thinking about such nonsense. People are just fighting to be a little happier since birth. They just survive day by day. The next question was whether Kang Hyun had something that he wanted to protect. The guy answered that he had to protect his family. Has he ever thought about becoming a hero? The guy replied that after several of his deaths, he understood his place in the world. Such a cool but exhausting job, becoming a hero is not for him. Based on the administrator's observations, the heroes definitely have natural talent. Kang Hyun doesn't have it. The guy decided that he was going to punch the administrator in the face, but he extended his hands woven from light to him and declared that he was a fan of Kang Hyun. He was very happy when he watched the guy undergo training. The joy of watching him teach? Is this guy a sadist? Kang Hyun suddenly asked. At the 5th stage, where the condition for passing is wisdom, should the task change every time? The administrator's figure began to melt. He said that he was very pleased to talk with Kang Hyun, who disappeared. The system congratulated the guy on completing the 8th stage. From the depths of space came the words that learning is just the beginning. New challenges await the guy, and whether Kang Hyun wants it or not, the administrator believes that the guy will become a hero who will save the world. Kang Hyun cursed and demanded that his interlocutor not leave. He realized that the administrator did everything to ensure that Kang Hyun passed the 5th stage. This son of a bitch has completely disappeared. Kang Hyun could only curse helplessly. The system reported that Kang Hyun became the 62nd person to complete the training and received the title of training graduate. Kang Hyun woke up with a gag in his mouth. Clearing his throat, he pulled the sock out of his mouth. The sister calmly told him that he had annoyed her and all the neighbors with his screams, and she shut his mouth. Judging by the expression on his brother's face, he failed the stage again. I wonder how long it will take him to complete it. Kang Hyun opened the system window in front of Aiken and boasted that he was now the most capable. He went through everything. My sister wasn't very impressed. She advised his brother to go and earn some money and invited him to have breakfast. After breakfast, the sister went to work, and her brother sat on the sofa and opened the system window. Apart from the title, all other effects apply only 50%. He applied his training graduate title and reached for the box next to him. He had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Now he can reveal the essence of the mysterious item he received after defeating the hobgoblin. Magic Explosion is a skill book that allows you to learn the Magic Explosion skill. Ability: shoots a magical sphere with explosive force. The book of skills and skills fell into his hands. After 4 months of screaming openly, Kang Hyun has finally mastered the art of silent screaming. But this did not diminish his joy. An invaluable acquisition. Of course, he wants to learn the Magic Explosion skill. The book shone with a bright light, and the skill was obtained. Now that the loot is sorted, should Kang Hyun apply for admission to the Awakened Training School? And Min, a newly appointed civil servant. Her first job is the Awakened Training School, where those who complete the training must receive a certificate. The Awakened education system in Korea is rapidly developing and becoming one of the best in the world. We believe that this happened because a similar system already existed. They may be newcomers, but they are already future heroes. Watching them begin their journey is incredibly rewarding. This is what Min thought just a few hours ago. Now she was sitting at the table and could not raise her head from the problems that had befallen her. In front of her stood a gloomy thug who showed his ID. The girl looked at the ID and burst into tears. Kang Hyun was surprised. What's happened? Through sobs, Min asked why they were all doing this to her. Kang Hyun's eyes widened. He tried to calm the girl down and asked what her problem was. People in line began to pay attention to them. They said disapprovingly that he had made the employee cry and had offended her. Kang Hyun genuinely didn't understand what he did wrong. Instructor Kim Yi-hyun walked past the line and saw that the application process was slow and decided to find out what was wrong. When he saw Kang Hyun, he froze in place. Kang Hyun stared at the instructor. He seemed familiar to him. Kim Yi-hyun walked to the table and took Kang Hyun's ID. In the photo, the guy looked completely different than in life. Kang Hyun swore that his appearance changed due to the skill. The instructor looked at the guy in surprise. Kang Hyun indicated that he had completed training up to the 5th stage. The guy played it down so as not to attract attention. The instructor drew attention to Kang Hyun's level, 12th. He asked if the applicant had carried out an illegal raid on the dungeon. Kang Hyun reduced the level by half, but it was still too high. He admitted that he entered the dungeon before the law was passed. Then Kim Yi-hyun asked, what does the applicant mean when he writes that his unique ability is masculine strength? Kang Hyun explained that this ability temporarily doubles his strength. Kim Yi-hyun asked the last question. At the 3rd stage, the awakened ones receive a skill. At the 4th, an accessory. At the 5th, another skill. He needs to see all these awards. The meticulous instructor annoyed Kang Hyun, but still the guy showed him a huge fist and said that this was a skill of the 3rd stage. Then he bit his hand until it bled, and he showed the skill of self-healing and rapid regeneration. He received the mind ring in the 4th stage. Kang Hyun remembered that he transformed the giant's strength into the human strength as his unique ability. In addition, he had the ability to instill fear in his enemies by shouting. He can use it here. Kim Yi-hyun didn't mind, and Kang Hyun got ready to shout, but then there was one guy in line who was staring at him. Suddenly he recognized the guy, and remembered that the goblin slayer he had seen in videos on social networks was standing in front of them. Suddenly a terrible scream was heard, and all the people covered their ears and began to run away in panic. Kang Hyun fell silent and asked the instructor if he was happy. Kim Yi-hyun invited Mr. Kang Hyun to go to the 2nd floor of the nearby Hongmu building. The guy who recognized Kang Hyun watched their conversation. He looked after Kang Hyun as he left and smiled strangely. So Kang Hyun almost got rejected from school because he didn't look like his ID photo. But after he attracted everyone's attention with his roar, he was accepted and began training. The students recognized him and discussed how he loudly shouted at the woman that she had fainted. Kang Hyun saw that the students did not like him. He sat gloomily in the audience alone. Not far from him sat the same guy who recognized Kang Hyun as the Goblin Slayer. The audience included school leaders and teachers. Kim Yi-hyun introduced himself and said that he would be conducting training at the Seongnam branch of the Awakened Training School. The training will consist of 10 days of morning and afternoon practical training. Food and accommodation will be provided to students. If there are no major problems, everyone will be able to complete the course and receive a certificate. Everyone knows that 6 months have passed since the world changed. Every day there is new information about dungeons and monsters. Therefore, tactics and strategies are also constantly evolving. In other words, what students are learning now is not exactly the right thing to do. Information may become irrelevant or useless. Therefore, in school, students will be taught only what is necessary for their survival. This concluded the first lecture. There was a 10-minute break before the next lesson. Kang Hyun was desperately missed. Will they do this nonsense for 10 days? A huge man approached him, extended his hand and said that his name was Guak Su-il. Kang Hyun didn't like this guy, but he still shook his hand and told him his name. Su-il grabbed the guy's hand tightly and used force. He believed that a guy like Kang Hyun should be put in his place from the very beginning. He squeezed his hand more and more tightly. He didn't like Kang Hyun from that moment when he started causing a commotion over a trifle, but the strong handshake didn't seem to bother Kang Hyun at all. Su-il didn't understand how the guy could stand him. Everything was very simple. Kang Hyun activated the giant's power. She increased muscle strength 12-fold. Su-il realized that he, who had dedicated his whole life only to developing strength, realized that he was losing. People have already begun to pay attention to them. Some students directly said that the two were fighting. Su-il couldn't stand there and look pathetic. He squeezed his hand with all his might, his face contorted with tension and anger. Kang Hyun also increased his strength, and Su-il's hand was torn apart. Muscles, tendons, skin parted and blood sprayed out. Su-il froze in shock. Kang Hyun also silently looked at his opponent. And after some time, an ambulance drove away from the school, and Kang Hyun angrily yelled that everything he said was true. This man came up first to introduce himself. Then he grunted and swelled his arms, and then burst with a loud noise. Kim Yi-hyun couldn't believe it. Kang Hyun shouted that it was all true. And if it weren't for his unique ability giant strength, which increased his strength by 1.5 times, he could have suffered. You can check the security camera to make sure he is telling the truth. Kim Yi-hyun recalled that Kang Hyun said that his ability is called male strength, and it increases the strength by 2 times, not 1.5. Kang Hyun was embarrassed and said that he was confused by the numbers. Kim Yi-hyun sighed and told the guy to go back to class. Kang Hyun sat down gloomily in his seat in the audience. He was so exhausted on the first day. Some guy asked him for permission to sit together. Kang Hyun didn't mind, but thought that today was not a good day. First he was accosted by a muscular pig, and now by some kind of freak. The guy introduced himself as Yu-sung. Yu-sung was already a fan of Kang Hyun. He asked if he could call Kang Hyun brother, and said that he had just turned 18 and had already graduated. Yu-sung continued to chat, and excitedly asked how Kang Hyun made that guy's hand explode. Is this a unique skill? Kang Hyun is even more convinced that this guy is a real freak. He swore that he didn't do anything. At this time the second lesson began, and Kim Yi-hyun came into the office. He started the lecture. Currently, dungeons are divided into 2 types, normal and incomplete. Regular ones are the most common. They are usually opened 4 weeks after emergence. As many students already know, the opening of a dungeon refers to the phenomenon when monsters begin to emerge from it. An incomplete dungeon is a dungeon whose opening time cannot be predicted. This can happen either before or after 4 weeks, so you need to be on the lookout. There are 2 ways to prevent the dungeon from opening. One of them is to clear the dungeon by targeting the central, or main core. Another way is to periodically remove regular cores to delay the opening of the dungeon. However, you need to be careful with the order in which you attack the cores. At this moment, the lecturer was interrupted by a loud voice in the audience. The big guy from the audience said that he didn't want to listen to useless chatter. He needs to know if there is something to fight monsters. Kang Hyun turned around and said that these stupid muscular jocks were nothing but problems. He did not consider himself stupid. Kim Yi-hyun invited the brawler to go downstairs. He came down with joy, stood up, spread his arms and asked what would happen now. Kim Yi-hyun noted the time on his phone and announced that he would dodge and block the student's attacks for 1 minute. If he even touches the instructor's body, he can consider that he has completed the course. And if he fails, he will be expelled. Is he sure he wants to do this? Kang Hyun and Yu-sung both thought that the second hunk was very annoying, but the spectacle promises to be funny. Both guys prepared to watch the performance with interest. Kim Yi-hyun asked the big man again if he was sure that he would not regret his choice. He laughed and pulled out a real sword. Is the instructor confident that he will not regret it? The guard warned Kim Yi-hyun about the danger, but he replied that everything was in order and stepped towards the enemy. The thug decided that the end had come for the instructor and attacked him. Kim Yi-hyun stood still. He quietly dodged his opponent's sword and said that attacks made with warning are pointless. Even if the person does not attack from behind, surprise is the basis of the attack. He dodged the next furious attack with his sword, and he ended up behind the attacker. The enemy will not wait for the thug to attack. The muscular jock flew into a rage and began to randomly swing his sword, but the instructor was elusive. He also managed to say that simply swinging a sword is not enough. You need to be able to observe and understand how the enemy moves without missing a single blow. The completely enraged opponent shouted that he would stop talking nonsense, and he swung his sword with force. Kim Yi-hyun ducked under the sword, and he continued his lecture. Attacking with all your might is not always the best approach. This inevitably makes the movements larger, and as a result, the gaps in the defense increase. With these words, he delivered a terrifying kick to his opponent. He knocked the sword out of his hands, and the sword stuck into the ceiling. The big man sat down on the floor, and Kim Hyun continued that if you do this, you can get tired quickly. 1 minute has passed. Time's up. The students in the audience were speechless by what they saw. Kang Hyun saw a video of a professional boxer dodging punches from a common man. But to be able to do that against someone with the ability, Kang Hyun couldn't believe that even among the awakened ones there was such a difference. The instructor demonstrated such speed and reaction speed that even Kang Hyun, who had improved his performance, would have a hard time following him if they met in a one-on-one duel. Kang Hyun was watching the fight and really wanted to fight the instructor. Turning his attention to his neighbor, Kang Hyun noted that he had an unusually idiotic expression on his face. The guy is probably crazy. Probably shouldn't have allowed him to sit next to you. I wouldn't want people to think they look alike. The curriculum of the Awakened School consisted of theoretical classes in the morning and practical classes in the afternoon. At today's training, students practiced weapons handling techniques. Kim Hyun suggested that everyone get weapons. At first, everyone will train in their own way, and assistant instructors will correct mistakes. There can be no individual lessons because there are few instructors. Kang Hyun chose the sword. Yoo-sung approached him and offered to train together, but Kim Hyun shouted that sparring was prohibited until the 6th day of training. All the students began to show their skills, and Kang Hyun saw that their level was very low. He decided he'd better practice punches for practice, which he immediately began to do. The sword was flying in his hand. Kim Hyun turned his attention to the guy, and he began to watch him. One of the instructors noticed that Kang Hyun was doing lunges incorrectly. In this stance, you need to slightly narrow your legs and change the angle of the sword. Otherwise, it seems that the guy is showing off, but in practice, it is useless. As Kang Hyun will see when he enters the dungeon, it is difficult to use sword skills in real combat. The guy didn't understand what the instructor was talking about. He grabbed him by the clothes and pulled him towards him. Is the instructor so good at fighting that he can give him advice? Maybe then they can try it together. Kim Hyun asked all students to stop practicing. From this moment on, a sparring session will take place between one of the students and the assistant instructor. Kang Hyun and the instructor were frozen in silence. Kim Hyun continued. Instructor Seong-han will follow the instructions just given, and student Kang Hyun will continue to swing the sword as usual. They will only have one exchange of blows. The opponents stood opposite each other. 1, 2. On the count of 3, Kang Hyun charged. Seong-han put out his sword and blocked his opponent's blow. Kang Hyun furiously continued to slash with his sword, disarmed the instructor, and he began to fall back, unable to withstand such a fierce attack. Knocking the opponent to the ground, Kang Hyun stepped back. All spectators silently looked at the result of the sparring. Kim Hyun said the weapon skills the students are now training should prepare them for real combat. They train their body to respond immediately to an attack. However, as student Kang Hyun showed, we must not forget that the most important thing is to react at the right moment. Kim Hyun offered to applaud the two fighters for their excellent display of skills. Kim Hyun thanked Seong-han for agreeing to take on such an unfavorable role, and he apologized to him for the inconvenience caused. He just wanted to test some of his guesses. Kang Hyun kept himself a precious training diary. There he wrote down everything that happened to him. On the first day, one big guy started a fight with him, and the guy taught him a lesson. The guy in Yoo-sung acts friendly, but he seems to be crazy. The theoretical classes were boring, and the practical ones weren't very useful. The second day was not much different from the first. In the morning everyone studied theory, and in the afternoon there were practical classes. There was more weapon training, and Yoo-sung was very excited. Kang Hyun decided that he had better stay away from this guy. On the third day, the only one who spoke to Kang Hyun was Yoo-sung. But when asked how many stages he went through, he answered that it was a secret. On the fourth day, Kang Hyun felt depressed and drew pictures in his diary. In practice, he practiced striking with 2 swords. The 5th day met a bored Kang Hyun. He wanted to go home, but during practical classes he simply lay on the ground. On the 6th day, it was so boring that the guy did not raise his head from the table. He asked if Yoo-sung wanted to cause a little trouble. He replied that his friend himself said that he needed to study well and complete the course. Kang Hyun directly said that if Yoo-sung gets kicked out, it will be his problem. Yoo-sung was surprised at how easily his comrade could say nasty things to others. However, he noticed that today was the 6th day, and sparring would begin today. He feels that something interesting will happen. His intuition tells him this. Yoo-sung smiled mysteriously. During an afternoon training session, the assistant instructor missed a blow with a sword and was disarmed. The instructor announced that Kang Hyun had won and the next group prepared to fight. Kang Hyun returned to the place where Yu Sung approved his fight. Kang Hyun was not happy. It seemed to him that this was all a child's game. He was surprised by the low level of the students. He didn't know much about talents, but it seemed to him that ordinary people couldn't go through many of the stages. They were told that sparring would continue until the 8th day. Will they all continue to do boring nonsense? The students continued sparring with varying degrees of skill. One of the instructors stopped the tip of his weapon a few centimeters from his opponent's face. Kim Yi-hyun stopped the fight. He announced the winner to Kim Chan. Kang Hyun noted that this instructor is not bad. It's better to fight him or Kim Yi-hyun. Yu Sung was supposed to fight in the next group. He walked towards the stage with Kang Hyun watching him. He had a bad feeling. Yu Sung isn't going to cause trouble? But if there is an instructor on stage, then nothing terrible can happen. Yu Sung's partner was Lee Yuri, a magician. She will use a personal weapon instead of a training weapon. The girl had a staff in her hands. This will give her an advantage due to the lack of space. Yu Sung didn't mind, but Yu Sung had a mace in his hands, although in training he always used a sword. Yu Sung replied that there is no rule that prohibits the use of different weapons. The fighters went to different corners, and Kim Yi-hyun gave the signal to start the battle. Lee Yuri raised her staff, directed magical energy towards her opponent and attacked him. Yu Sung repelled the magical waves with his mace. It was very impressive. The audience watched the fight with bated breath. Kang Hyun saw magic in real life for the first time. This means that it can be learned, depending on how successful you are in learning. Perhaps the girl trained separately. Kang Hyun didn't see her during practice. Lee Yuri was annoyed that her first attack failed. She activated the crystal and repeated the attack with redoubled force. Yu Sung watched as the magic crystal flew towards him. He glanced at instructor Kim Yi-hyun. He raised his mace towards the flow of magic and began to spin this flow. Kang Hyun saw that something strange was happening in Yu Sung's actions. He twisted the trajectory of the magical flow, and he deliberately directed him towards instructor Kim Yi-hyun. Kim Yi-hyun dodged the magic fist flying at him and cleared the way to Lee Yuri. And Yu Sung, armed with a mace, rushed past the instructor who did not have time to react, and rushed at the girl, not paying attention to the loud cries of Kim Yi-hyun that the fight was over. The girl was seriously injured, and Yu Sung threw his hand up in a gesture of victory. His shining face was splattered with blood. This bastard turned out to be even crazier than Kang Hyun thought. First aid was urgently provided to the victim, and an ambulance was called. Lee Yuri suffered a compound fracture of his right arm. Kim Yi-hyun pointed his sword at Yu Sung and asked what he just did. Hyun admitted the mistake, but such cases can happen during sparring. Kim Yi-hyun didn't believe him. He called a 15-minute break and demanded that Yu Sung come with him. Kang Hyun no longer paid attention to his friend. His attention was focused elsewhere. The blade that Kim Yi-hyun used to stop Yu Sung was familiar to him. The one who awakened in the battle with the hobgoblin had exactly the same one. Despite the incident, sparring continued for 2 more days. Yu Sung was not expelled and continued to participate in training, but it seems that he was marked as a suspect. The instructors and assistants behaved extremely carefully with him. Even a healer was on hand during training. Thanks to all this, the 8th day passed without incident. Everything was going too well until Kang Hyun walked into Kim Yi-hyun's office, and he didn't offer him a duel with real swords. Kim Yi-hyun lowered his head into his hands. This course was particularly grueling. Graduation is in 2 days. Can we let it pass peacefully? And who allowed the student to break into the teacher's office without warning? Kang Hyun openly asked, is the instructor also feeling uneasy? Is it true that they have already met before? Indeed, they met. And thanks to Kang Hyun, we were able to prevent additional destruction last time. Now Kim Yi-hyun agreed to a duel with real swords, and they met in the training room. Kim Yi-hyun turned his attention to Kang Hyun's sword. The guy said that he went through 5 stages, and this sword is a reward for completing the 6th. How did this happen? Kang Hyun said that he simply found this sword while clearing out. Kim Yi-hyun realized that the guy would not answer his questions, opened the system window. He took out his blades from the inventory, and he attacked the enemy with words, which will show him what he finds during sweeps. With lightning speed, he was behind Kang Hyun, but he reacted no less quickly, and repelled the attack with a blow of his sword. Kim Yi-hyun thought his opponent was focused on strength, but his agility was also impressive. Kang Hyun replied that if a person is only good in water, it makes him vulnerable. And since he has the ability to recover, he asks the instructor not to be shy and to attack with full force. Kim Yi-hyun promised that he would not hold back and disappeared. This time he attacked Kang Hyun from above, and the guy began to fight off powerful blows. The instructor assessed the enemy, who easily held his own in battle with him. The guy had incredible physical strength. His recovery skills were very effective. Kang Hyun himself was glad that he was finally fighting a worthy opponent. Kim Yi-hyun decided that he needed to be more aggressive and create a gap in the enemy's defense with continuous attacks. He achieved this, and his blade wounded Kang Hyun in the arm. He was about to pull out the weapon and break the distance, but was unable to do so. It seemed as if Kang Hyun had caught his blade in his wound. Kang Hyun's face lit up with joy. His opponent fell into a trap. He got as close to him as possible and delivered a strong headbutt to Kim Yi-hyun's forehead. He fell to the floor without a word. He lost. Then they applied ice to the instructor's injured head and opened a can of beer. They sat on the floor and each believed that his opponent was very strong. Kang Hyun said that this sparring was a draw. They agreed not to use the skills, but he did. Kim Yi-hyun replied that he had won then, and the cadet could be expelled for cheating. Kang Hyun yelled indignantly that this is a passive skill, and nothing can be done with it. The next day, a dungeon exploration training session was scheduled. The door to it was surrounded by barbed wire. The figure of a man in a cloak with a hood appeared near the door at night. The man walked slowly to the door. He opened it and went inside. The door slowly closed behind him. In the morning, the whole group came to the door. This F-rank dungeon was called Geika Forest. She stood in the middle of a residential area. The Geika monsters that appeared here were stronger than the monsters in the F-rank dungeons. But there were two reasons why this place was chosen as a training place. The first is a field-type dungeon and there are traps. But other than monsters, there are no threats here. Secondly, Geikas do not live in groups, so you can lure them somewhere and deal with them one by one. More detailed information will be given to the cadets when they enter the dungeon. For Kang Hyun, this was the first time he entered a dungeon in real life. The students began to go inside as a group. Everyone had a slight feeling of levitation when passing through the door. When Kang Hyun opened his eyes, he found himself in another world. It was surrounded by tropical forest. Palm trees grew everywhere. A river flowed among the hills. Kang Hyun wanted to know if this dungeon is a portal or a gate. Will he be able to return to where he came from? An Yu-sung, who was standing nearby, replied that this was explained in class and yes, you can come back. Kim Yi-hyun, who accompanied the group, said that 100 assistants would lure Geika and conduct a demonstration. After this, students will lure one monster at a time in a group of 5. Cadets should stay in open areas where it is easier to fight. Geika is a bird-type monster, a little over 2 meters tall and similar to an ostrich. Its distinctive features are fast legs and a strong beak. The beak attack can penetrate even plate armor. Since this creature is deadly, extreme caution is required. The standard strategy is to surround the monster with several people and tie its legs. Suddenly, the windows of the system opened in front of the cadets, in which it was written that the central core of the dungeon had been removed and a portal to the outside had opened. The dungeon will collapse soon. Please everyone leave. The cadets left the dungeon. It was already beginning to collapse. Kim Yi-hyun commanded that people enter the portal one at a time without panic. In the schoolyard, Kim Yi-hyun was counting the students who had left. Everyone was there. He was thinking about who cleared the dungeon when his assistant caught his attention. The dungeon was filled with smoke and lit up with threatening lights. Kim Yi-hyun believed his eyes. He urgently demanded to request support and for the cadets to leave the battlefield. The dungeon breakthrough began quickly and unexpectedly for people. Kang Hyun approached the instructor, who was glad to receive the support. In such a dungeon breakout, a strong cadet can be useful. Kang Hyun couldn't understand how this happened. Kim Yi-hyun quickly said that if the destruction and removal of the main core did not kill the boss monster, then when the dungeon collapsed, the remaining monsters would jump out through the portal. This is called breaking a dungeon. Before he could finish speaking, the first monster came out. Kim Yi-hyun ran to prepare the students how to behave in the danger zone and left Kang Hyun to fight the monsters. The instructor organized the cadets into groups of 5. If they did not follow the instructions, they could die. Kang Hyun turned around. A crowd of creatures rushed towards him from the doors. How can he deal with them all? Unexpectedly, Yunsun came to his aid, belligerently waving his mace. And one Geika has already hit him on the head with it. The creature screamed and sank, unable to withstand such a blow. Kang Hyun watched in numbness as An Yun-sung deftly beats the monsters. As expected, the best way to crush them is with a mace. Kang Hyun thought that such a crazy person on the backup instills confidence. The guy pulled out his sword and joined in the fun. He rushed at the creatures and began to chop them with all his might. Now Yunsun watched him work. Kang Hyun shouted to his partner to cover his ears and activate Lion's Roar of Fury. From his cry about chicken-headed bastards, the monster birds froze and opened their beaks wide. Their courage was fading before our eyes. This cry was also heard by the people who were fighting the monsters. Everyone noticed that these creatures became weaker. Kim Yi-hyun remembered that it was Kang Hyun's skill. Kim Yi-hyun really hoped that support would come now, and everything would work out. Kang Hyun was calling out a magical explosion at this time. which left a roasted corpse of the monster. Yunsen was delighted with his friend's abilities. Can he also do magic? Kang Hyun answered evasively that he acquired this skill some time ago. But there was no time to relax. There was a roar from the dungeon, and the boss monster mutant Gaika came out. Kim Ye-hyun thought in despair that there was still no reinforcement, and this monster is so huge and strong. But the two idiots were not afraid. On the contrary, they quarreled over which of them would kill this monster. Everyone wanted to do it themselves. Kim In-hyun reported to his superior's office. Tomorrow is the graduation ceremony, and today there was an accident during training in the dungeon. Someone broke into the training dungeon and caused an explosion. There is speculation that this is a continuation of the terror in the dungeon, which has been ongoing since last month. The woman asked if any Kurasans stood out. Ihan replied that there were two of them. They were the ones who dealt with the boss mutant Geiko. This news surprised the woman. One of them is a cadet with enormous physical strength. Strength, speed, agility. Everything is at the level of a monster. However, his main strength is his incredible ability to recover. He is not only resilient, but also reckless without fear of injury. As a result, his unpredictable tactics can become the most difficult for the enemy. The second guy is a completely different type. Ihan didn't know whether to call him a genius. He is a cadet who has excellent fighting sense. His quick reactions and technique are truly outstanding, but his excessive brutality is a major flaw. Kim Ye-hyun rarely praised someone, and the woman asked if he had made a job offer. Kim Ye-hyun stubbornly replied that selling students while being an instructor is prohibited. Guild leader Dagun Han-sen laughed. Employees are often like their boss. She wished that Kim Ye-hyun would return to the guild as soon as possible when he finished working as an instructor. They both decided that there was something strange about this incident. The school principal gave a speech at the graduation ceremony. He thanked all the cadets and instructors for their work and expressed hope that they would all become wonderful people. At this point, the ceremony was completed. Kang Hyun was frankly bored, and in general he thought that the head of the school was Kim Ye-hyun. After closing, everyone went outside to go home. And Hyun-song was met by a white limousine with a driver. Kang Hyun's jaw dropped. Hyunsen offered Kang Hyun to take the guy home, and Kang Hyun immediately agreed. He had never driven a car like this. But before he could get into the car, Kim Ye-hyun called out to him. The guy decided that the kind instructor had come to say goodbye to him personally, but he replied that that was not the case. The instructor said that a reward for clearing the dungeon would be given to both guys who provided great help. Kang Hyun and An Yoon Seong will be contacted soon. With these words he left, and Kang Hyun yelled at his back that he would like to hear words of gratitude, and not all this. Kim Ye-hyun just sighed. Then he turned around and replied that he was sure that he and the guy would soon meet in the dungeon, but let him never forget about his responsibility as a person with abilities. After all, Kang Hyun is now awakened. He rushed home and began to brag to his sister. She reacted sluggishly to this, without looking up from the phone. The brother said that starting tomorrow he will go through all the dungeons, but how to find them? If you search on the map, do they appear? Kan Aiken replied that there is an application for ability users. It is called Radar. Probably everything comes from there. Kang Hyun tried to figure things out to make a lot of money. It was said that the reward for completing the lowest F-rank dungeon was 20 million won. In addition, the magic stone attracts attention as a new source of energy. They say that items dropped by monsters are also expensive. Kang Hyun's father asked his wife what they had heard about their son. The mother replied that he had recently sent her 10 million, and it looks like the brother and sister bought a used car last month. But the mother was still worried. She heard that many people were injured and died. But my father replied that it was better than being unemployed at that age. At this time, their son was fighting monsters in the dungeon. The blood of monsters flowed like a river. Although the monsters were quite serious, killing them all was nonsense for Kang Hyun. Near the dungeon stood Kang Hyun's Bentley. The phone was ringing in the car seat, but there was no one to answer. The owner was busy. The mother was worried that her son was not in touch, and the father assumed that the guy was sleeping. There's no need to wake him up. You just need to call him tomorrow. And let the wife not forget to tell her son about what appeared in front of the supermarket. The mother doubted whether to tell her son about this. She would rather write to him in the group if he had one. But in any case, it's unpleasant. The dungeon doors opened, and a crowd of orc warriors came out of it. The last one to come out was the huge boss. At dawn, Kang Hyun left the cleared dungeon. He removed the central core and opened a portal to the outside. He completed it in one day. The guy was thinking whether it was worth going to E-rank dungeons or whether it was still difficult, and he had to be careful. He does not yet know whether resurrection can be used in real life. He opened the car and thought that first he would go home to sleep, then eat with his sister. Here he froze. The phone showed that his sister had been calling him all night. Kang Hyun immediately called back and heard Aiken's excited voice. Something bad happened. Mom and Dad. The longer Kang Hyun listened, the worse he felt. The news reported that a large-scale underground breach had occurred, and the government announced that it would make every effort to resolve the problem as quickly as possible. The Ministry of National Defense, in collaboration with civilian awakening groups, cordoned off the area to prevent further damage. But residents trapped in the isolated zone are increasingly worried. The Dangun Guild said it would actively participate in the rescue efforts. Kang Hyun was planning to go to the dungeon alone. Aiken was worried, but her brother was confident. Even if he looks like this, he still went through training. Let his sister wait for him at home. She very much asked him to be careful and not show off. Kang Hyun advised her to go and rest, and he would bring Mom and Dad soon. In an isolated area, his car was stopped by the military. The passage was then closed. Kang Hyun showed them the documents. He's an ability user, can't he get through? The military hesitated. Alone, without a group? The guy is very strange. A man passing by told the military to let the guy through. They need all people. The military said that they would not respond if something happened to Kang Hyun and let him through. While Kang Hyun was driving to the location, he was looking at the app on his phone. There were 5 confirmed open dungeons, including an E-rank dungeon. But he had to save his parents. He hoped they were okay. If no monsters appear on the road, he will arrive at the place in 2 hours. But as soon as he thought this, a monster boar flew out onto the road and crashed into his car. The impact was so strong that Kang Hyun lost control, and the car was thrown to the side and overturned. The monster's eyes burned with a bloodthirsty fire. Kang Hyun managed to get out of the car, which the monster crushed. The guy managed to grab his sword and stood in the path of the giant boar. And now they will fight. He will avenge Bentley. A menacing growl escaped from the monster's mouth. Kang Hyun had to lift his head up to see the monster's head. This specimen was very large, but then the forest was filled with wild screams. The noise was incredible. A flock of warlike goblins and orcs ran towards them as fast as they could. They made war whoops. Kang Hyun cursed. As soon as he forgets about these monsters, they appear and create problems. But he doesn't have time to deal with them. Turning sharply, the guy ran away. They say the best revenge is forgiveness. Let's believe these words. The boar rushed after him. Kang Hyun ran well and broke away from his pursuer. But the boar did not give up and ran behind. The monster was out of luck. His run was interrupted by a hail of arrows. The goblins were happy that they would be able to take down their prey. This worked to Kang Hyun's advantage. Let the monsters fight each other. Now that Bentley was gone, the guy ran to save his parents. But it was very difficult to get to the place on foot. It was already dark. The battery on his phone was low. He couldn't even turn on the flashlight. If he had known that this would happen, he would have walked along the main road with lanterns. And he tried to take a shortcut. On his back, Kang Hyun felt some movement from behind. He turned around to look but saw no one. However, he sensed danger, and he barely had time to swing his sword to repel the attack. The blood of the wounded monster splashed onto him. The murdered monster appeared. The system gave out its name, Disrufen. Kang Hyun realized that he would not be able to sleep today. It turns out that there are monsters that can become invisible. This was a serious danger. The movement of air around him accelerated. A second later, he was surrounded by huge beasts. Kang Hyun picked up the sword that he had not let go of and rushed into battle. All monsters were injured. The guy moved with incredible speed, but in front of him were formidable enemies. He had to use additional internal strength to cope with such a number of monsters. When dawn broke, the entire clearing was littered with the corpses of monsters, and Kang Hyun was resting on a tree. This was the safest place in the forest. With the first rays of the sun, he woke up. The bed was very uncomfortable, and he couldn't sleep properly after fighting all night. He had to hurry. He had already lost a lot of time. The parents sat in the apartment and reread their son's message. He wrote that he went to help them, but they needed to close and was sitting at home quietly. They could not call their son. There were communication problems throughout the entire area. Dad looked out the window. Orcs were walking along the street, but they were not the most terrible. A terrible monster appeared and killed all the orcs. Who can handle him? Where did such a terrible creature come from? The creature thought that the orcs were just a warm-up for him. Mom and Dad should rejoice. Their adorable son has arrived. Kang Hyun was triumphant. He is the one who goes through dungeons alone. Dealing with a dozen orcs is a piece of cake for him. The orcs continue to march, but Kang Hyun is not at all tired and is ready for battle. 3 boss monsters approached him at once. It turns out that this dungeon was E rank, not F rank as he thought. Kang Hyun screamed at the top of his lungs to his parents. He came for them. Let them stay at home and not make a sound. The parents recognized their son's voice. They looked out the window. Is this man really their boy? What happened to him that he changed so much? On the street, their son rushed to attack 3 huge monsters. The monsters bared their teeth and prepared to devour the man, but Kang Hyun repelled their attack. The orc's sword collided with the guy's sword, and sparks of power flew in different directions. The orc attacked again, and Kang Hyun held out his sword and gripped it tightly in his hands. Having put all the magical power into his hand, Kang Hyun was going to repel the enemy. He threw it at the orc. And he fell to the ground, showing no signs of life. Another monster attacked Kang Hyun from behind. The guy ducked under the attacker's arm, blocked his sword with his unprotected hand and struck back. He felt his bone breaking. This angered the guy. With a strong blow, he inflicted such damage on the enemy that he fell and could not get up. Kang Hyun stuck his fist into the monster's mouth, which opened in a threatening scream. And he used his ability, a magical explosion. The orc was blown to pieces, but Kang Hyun did not celebrate the victory for long. Looking around, he saw that he was surrounded by a dense ring of monsters. The furious enemies bared their teeth, but did not yet dare to attack the person. Heavy footsteps were heard from behind. Kang Hyun looked at who was approaching him and cursed. A gigantic figure towered above the heads of the monsters. The general of monsters had no doubt that he would deal with the man. Kang Hyun noticed that the orc leader was extremely ugly. That's what he told him. The guy wanted to save his magic for quick regeneration, but the situation was hopeless. He activated the giant's power. His muscles began to change. Besides, Kang Hyun decided that he could use a lion's roar of rage. Now let's see what this giant freak is capable of. And at that very moment, Kang Hyun missed a blow to the face from his opponent. He flew back to the monsters watching the fight. The orc general launched his next blow, which also hit the target. The guy understood that this bastard was just playing with him. The blows rained down one after another. Kang Hyun didn't know if he had used up all his magical power, but his body was no longer recovering. The guy didn't even know if he could be revived. The monster was approaching Kang Hyun, who was lying exhausted, but the guy, overcoming the pain, rose to his feet. As long as his family is behind him, he can't back down. In anger, he shouted a challenge to the monster. With the last of his strength, he rushed to the attack. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw that orcs were already crawling through the chimney toward the window of my parents' room. These fucking bastards can't get into the apartment. Forgetting about the orc general, Kang Hyun was afraid to help his parents. Two monsters tried to stop him. However, Kang Hyun's sword interrupted their attempt. But the huge hand of the orc general slammed the guy into the asphalt. Losing consciousness, the guy thought that the orcs could not penetrate his parents. At that moment, flashes of yellow light illuminated the battlefield. This new power attacked the monster. The new fighter had incredible strength and was not tired in the previous fight. He defeated the orc general without much effort. Upon closer inspection, the fighter turned out to be a woman, the leader of the Dangun Guild, Han Sen. Very quickly, with the help of the remaining members of the guild, the orcs were destroyed. Next, it remained to evacuate the wounded and other residents of the area. The damage was enormous, but thanks to the fact that someone managed to gather all the orcs in one place, the destruction was less than in other areas. Unfortunately, the person who did this has passed away. We need to take care of his body. Turning to pay her last respects to the hero, Han Sen's eyes widened. Somehow the body disappeared. Only streaks of blood remained. Kang Hyun opened his eyes. There were no wounds on his face or body. He woke up in the same tree where he fell asleep the night before. The system reported that resurrection 24 hours after death would remain in effect until the Earth passed the crisis. Resurrection will occur at the last point of the dream. The penalty is -1 level and a reduction in all abilities by 50% for a day. It became clear to Kang Hyun why he was back on the tree. This was his last place to sleep. It's been a day already. How are his parents doing? He must return to them immediately. He jumped from the tree to the ground and hissed in pain. The body feels so heavy. This is probably due to the penalty for resurrection. He ran as fast as he could, praying along the way that his parents would be okay. After 5 hours of exhausting running with an aching body, Kang Hyun saw his hometown, which had turned into empty ruins. The guy wandered there aimlessly until he came across a military base. There he borrowed a phone and was able to contact Aiken. His sister told him the news. His father had lost his arm, and his mother was in a coma. 2 months have passed since all these events. The news reported that the Dangun Guild had gone hunting in the D-rank dungeon on the Haiji Plains. Guild leader Han Sen also spoke about a C-rank dungeon that had recently appeared. Kang Hyun was about to go to the dungeon again. Aiken reminded her brother that he had died 3 times this week, but he replied that everything was fine. His sister shouted to him that what happened was not his fault. And why does he always walk alone? but her brother no longer listened to her. In the dungeon, a group of boys and girls attacked the monster. The giant Anthria was cut into pieces by swords. The group leader received a signal that his level had been increased. The guy was very happy. In response to the team's congratulations, their leader replied that he had completed the 5th stage of training and was an elite. Soon he will stop messing with losers like his group. If by the end of the month he reaches level 35, he will go to the Dangun Guild. Before he could finish speaking, Kang Hyun ran into the cave. He didn't even pay attention to the group of people. The guys were surprised that someone was going through the dungeon alone. They shouted after the guy that the boss's room was right ahead and it was very dangerous there. They couldn't leave it like that and decided to follow this madman. The cave was still full of monsters that resembled giant ants. Kang Hyun, sword in hand, met a whole horde of giants. He activated Wayne's secret, a mad warrior who lived for battle. As this power is used, the body is destroyed. Taking advantage of this ability, he entered into battle with superior enemy forces. In addition, he used a magical explosion. All that remained of the monsters were parts of their bodies. The stunned group ran into the cave towards the end of the battle. What they saw made their jaws drop. The unknown fighter was already approaching the core of the dungeon. Kang Hyun just received the Wayne secret skill the day before. This skill paired well with his regeneration skills. Without his advanced body regeneration, which allowed him to recover from any damage to the body, except the brain, within 24 hours, it would have been difficult for him. His wounds were healing before our eyes. The group leader stammered and asked if the guy was okay. Kang Hyun replied yes. He took the normal dungeon core and asked permission to go out. The guys got along with the fact that the guy does not collect magic crystals from the bodies of monsters. But Kang Hyun was in a hurry and had no time for that. The group was happy that they would easily get a lot of money. Kang Hyun said without turning around that all this was nonsense. He personally wants to become stronger. Someone from the group asked who this guy was. The rest didn't care. The most important thing is that they will earn a lot of money. Thanks to this eccentric, they will receive as much as they previously received in a week. One of the guys said that maybe they met the one they say is the one who clears the dungeons. The group leader denied this. That guy is clearing F rank, and this cave is E rank. Even Han Sen herself cannot clear a dungeon of this level alone. At this time, the system issued a message that the dungeon core had been destroyed, and the portal to the outside was open. Kang Hyun received a magical item from the cave, an ant's cover, which, when activated, strengthened the skin. He thought about the fact that Wayne's secret and regeneration were already consuming a lot of mana. If he also uses a new skill. Using many skills is not always the right decision. The best example is the berserk ability of Bilgen's longsword. It increases strength and endurance, but deprives the ability to think sensibly. It doesn't matter how good an ability is if you use it thoughtlessly. You can't lose your cool no matter how much you're in a hurry. So far, Kang Hyun had only one goal, to become stronger at any cost. So he decided to learn a new skill anyway. Reporters interviewed the group that emerged from the dungeon. The journalist heard that recently, someone has been clearing dungeons alone and was recently seen here. The leader of the group said that it was not them, and this guy just came out of the portal. Kang Hyun was immediately blinded by the glare of the cameras. The reporters simultaneously shouted that they had heard a lot about him, why he did not join the guilds, and asked the guy to turn to them. Kang Hyun made his way through the crowd without making any comments. One of the journalists who got in his way received a heavy kick. When he became indignant, Kang Hyun grabbed him by the chest and asked what he would do to him. The guy looked away and apologized to Kang Hyun. Everyone decided that this bandit had several criminal records behind him. Kang Hyun entered the parking lot where his second Bentley was parked, and then a voice called out to him. Kang Hyun warily asked who was calling him. The man who approached replied that he had come to help the guy. He handed him a business card with a smile, on which it was written that he was Song Yong-ho, an employee of the Association of Awakened Ones. The association has been monitoring the guy for some time and will provide him with the necessary support if he decides to contact them. He doesn't have to answer right now. They will be happy to help at any time. With these words, he turned and left. Unlike guilds, in which people unite based on interests, the Association of the Awakened fights for their rights. True, Kang Hyun had never heard of them attracting people in this way. He went to a cafe to have a snack and think. Now his biggest problem was his magical power. Lately, she's completely focused on Wayne's secret and regeneration. She's not good enough for anything else. He received the ant shell, but still cannot use attack skills properly. So he needs one item and he will get it. He entered the auction, but he didn't see anything useful there. Regardless of type, accessories can be used a maximum of 4 times. He would prefer to buy something better, albeit more expensive. The next day, this is what happened. There is an E-rank dungeon in Hanam, a goblin village. If you kill the local sorcerers, You can with a high probability receive a ring that will increase magical power by 1 or 2, and sometimes by 4 stats. Kang Hyun learned from posts on the internet that the boss of the dungeon is a goblin arch-sorcerer. If you kill him, you can get a ring with good stats. Previously, parties of good friends gathered here to quietly earn money. But recently, some thugs took over the dungeon, declared that it belonged to them and did not allow anyone there. Until the dungeon is broken, the government will not pay attention to it. The author wrote a long post about this and wanted competent people to read it and send some large guild to clear that place. Kang Hyun approached the gate of this dungeon. The area was completely deserted, although the guy thought that these idiots would be right at the entrance. Without hesitation, he went inside. I went through the portal and found myself in a tropical forest. Immediately, he heard a voice saying that someone else had come to them. In the clearing, Kang Hyun saw a small group of people. The boy and girl looked at the newcomer with curiosity. One of the guys, who looked a lot like a gopnik, noted that the idiot has good clothes that probably cost a lot of money. The second guy was glad that today they would have a decent bonus. And today the girl dreamed of a pig, and she had a good feeling. Gopnik rose to meet Kang Hyun, and reported that the guy had invaded the possessions of the Temptation Guild. Kang Hyun asked in surprise, "So what?" They explained to him that if you invade someone else's property, you have to pay. Let the idiot give everything he has and they will try to spare him. Something flashed in front of them with terrible speed, and the friend of the Gopinka and the girl suddenly flew back a few steps. His condition was deplorable after colliding with Kang Hyun's fist, who stood calmly in his place, shrouded in the light of power. This made the remaining guys furious. Gopnik urgently reached for his artifacts, and the girl had already pulled out her sword. Kang Hyun blocked Gopnik's attack with a slight movement, and knocked him out with a punch. Kang Hyun managed to talk, and told the guys that he likes idiots like them, because when he beats them, he will not feel any guilt. A hail of blows rained down on Gopnik. Behind him, a trembling female voice activated a magical explosion, and something quite noticeably hit Kang Hyun. He even bent over and swore. It dawned on him. It turns out that a magical explosion is a ranged skill. He turned and walked towards the trembling girl. She begged this crazy bastard to stop. Kang Hyun did not approach her closely. He thanked her awkwardly. He learned something. Then he approached her closely and took the girl by the hand. In return, he will teach her something. He filled his palm with power and sent it into the girl's hand. That's much better. The girl screamed throughout the forest, and she fell to the ground, wailing that her hand would soon fall off. Kang Hyun felt like he didn't do anything special. He heard some sounds behind him, turned around and saw a small detachment of strong and very angry young people. Their leader was going to make this boor regret that he had coveted the territory of the Temptation Guild. He was already taking out his artifact from the system window. Holding a sparkling sword in front of him, the group leader grinned. The newcomer may not even think about leaving alive. Kang Hyun was still standing over the fallen girl. He turned to the rest of the guild members, and with a terrifying smile he replied that they had arrived on time. He just needed a guide. The training completely changed the life of the guy who attacked Kang Hyun. He seemed to be in a world where only strength mattered. In second place in this world was cruelty. And on the third, of course, money. Until last year, the guy was nothing more than the dregs of society, but now his life has sparkled with bright colors. He also gained the position of leader of a large guild. It's like a tiger got wings. As long as he is in the dungeon, he has nothing to fear, and this idiot who challenged him will not survive. But something went wrong. Kang Hyun instantly covered the distance that was between them and simply grabbed the leader by the nose. The presumptuous insolent lay on the ground, not yet realizing what the hell was happening. His accomplices lied next to him, and Kang Hyun left them. The leader realized that the guy didn't even take out his weapon. Does this mean he defeated them all with his bare hands? Kang Hyun drew his sword and ordered the shit-eaters to stand up and form a line. Now there will be a competition for the best guide. Kang Hyun made a threatening face. So, based on the results of Kang Hyun's special interview, after a strict selection, a member of the Temptation Guild, Kim Sunwoo, made it to the finals. Where's the applause? The rest of the guild met this message with complete silence. But this bastard really asked for applause, and everyone clapped their hands together. The guild leader looked very bad after such a fateful meeting. He wondered what would happen to them now. Kang Hyun thought about it. Do they promise to live a righteous life and stop doing bad things? Everyone nodded readily. They will be good now. A hail of blows immediately fell upon them. Are they taking Kang Hyun for an idiot? For a murderer, lying is a piece of cake. Kang Hyun's fists worked non-stop. After the massacre was completed, Kang Hyun took the trembling Kim Sunwoo under his arm and left. This is not to say that all dungeons are like this, but some can be quite similar in size to a large city. Kang Hyun wondered if his guide was leading him in circles. Kim Sunwoo rejected this suggestion. He simply finds the best way to avoid encountering monsters. Kang Hyun did not understand the conductor's logic. It's even more fun with monsters. Otherwise, the road is very boring. They decided to take a break, and Kim Sun-woo began to cook dinner over the fire. Kang Hyun was very hungry, and was happy to see that they had ramen in the pot for dinner. He hasn't eaten this for a long time. While eating, Kang Hyun asked his partner how old he was. He replied that he was 25, and he went to college before he woke up. Kang Hyun asked why he got involved in this instead of continuing his studies. Kim Sun-woo hung up for a while. Then he replied that he had no money. The costs of studying grew and accumulated. He had to work part-time in several places, so the scholarship did not work out. Father's business went bankrupt, and mother. Kang Hyun interrupted him. Why should he listen to this sob story? Kim Sun-woo mentally fumed that the idiot asked him himself. After dinner, they went to bed. Kim Sun-woo listened to Kang Hyun's breathing and realized that he was fast asleep. The guy decided that this was his chance. If he kills this man now, there won't be anything bad about it. He remembered how the bastard dealt with his comrades. But he could not kill the sleeping Kim Sun-woo. He decided it was best for him to just run away. As soon as he turned and ran into the forest, a familiar voice called out to him and asked where he was going. If he decides to run away, Kang Hyun will kill him. And he says this quite seriously. The next day, the guide brought Kang Hyun to the place where the goblin village is located and where the main core is located. Kang Hyun also felt the concentration of magical power in one place. Kim Sun didn't feel anything, and Kang Hyun called him stupid. The guy laughed forcefully. You just have to be patient a little, it will all be over soon. Because now this bastard is going to die. Kim Sun-woo looked forward to this moment with joy. In the goblin village, all the monsters are concentrated around the core. But from time to time, they send reconnaissance groups, and the Withering Guild attacks them. Kim Sun-woo thought that if they didn't come across one along the way, then they were now in the village. Let's see how the idiot survives the E-rank dungeon. Kang Hyun was very animated. He liked everything. He stocked up on the necessary items. He is a master goblin cutter after all. Let the battle begin. A crowd of monsters attacked the guy. During the attack, a heavy backpack hit Kang Hyun on the back. Kim Sun-woo showed the guy his middle finger and shouted that he was getting out of here. He was not happy about the meeting, but he knows for sure that they will not see this stupid person again. Kang Hyun joyfully shouted after him that if he left, he would die. Kim Sun-woo didn't listen to the idiot. He ran quite a distance and stopped to catch his breath. Having opened the system window, the guy decided to find out what was happening. No matter how monster the bastard is, he will never get out. But the system issued a message that the main core of the dungeon had been removed, and the dungeon portal had been activated for exit. Kim Sun-woo's face fell and he broke out in a cold sweat. This can't happen. In the Goblin Village dungeon, there was only a central core around which all the monsters were located. There were no ordinary cannonballs in the dungeon. Kim Sun-woo didn't understand how this monster could clear such a dungeon alone. How did he overcome the goblins' numerical advantage? He couldn't burn them out with fire, could he? Kim Sun-woo understood that the bastard was strong, but he had no idea what he was capable of. Does he have great strength and durability? Of course they are still important, but they don't always help. Against a crowd, it is important to competently hold the defense and not flinch before the onslaught of enemies. If you withstand all the attacks and get to the boss along a direct path, then such an outcome is quite possible. But this is a dangerous strategy, where even one moment of delay can lead to failure. Kim Sun was scared by the thought of who they met in this dungeon. This human-shaped monster definitely has unimaginable power. Kang Hyun always knew that brute strength is the best thing in a fight. He quickly finished off the shaman. As a result, he received a shaman's magic crystal, which could increase his magical power by 4 points. Parenba was pleased that he had achieved his goal. He went to the portal. On the way, he had a dull thought about whether he should return to smack Kim Sun-woo, but he refused it. At the exit from the dungeon, a large group of people was already waiting for him. It was still the same Temptation Guild. Kim Sun-woo stood in the front row of those greeting. Kang Hyun estimated that half an hour would be enough for him to deal with them all. But an unfamiliar man standing in front said that there was a misunderstanding. They came not to fight, but to negotiate. He regrets that the guy encountered the rudeness of the guild members. The man introduced himself, Jong In-hyun, head of the Temptation Guild. He would like to know the name of the hero. Kang Hyun suggested that the guy finish with pleasantries and get to the point, otherwise he's already annoyed. Jong In-hyun invited the guy to join their guild. It guarantees everyone's respect and support with resources, and even a position in management. Jong In-hyun had to get this dude at any cost. With its help, you can become one of the strongest guilds. Kang Hyun responded with a decisive refusal. Jong In-hyun had no doubt that he would receive such an answer. He handed the guy his business card. Kang Hyun, without wasting a second, tore the card right in front of the amazed guild members, and threw it in Young In-hyun's face. He's not sugar himself, but he's not trash like them. How can such third-rate pieces of crap even try to recruit him? Why has Young In-hyun changed his face? Mad? Maybe they will fight right away. The guild leader laughed. They shouldn't fight. They came to negotiate. We can meet another time. When leaving, Kang Hyun grumbled that there would be no other time. And where did this scum come onto his head? Kim Sun-woo looked after Kang Hyun and thought that this crazy guy was even cool. There was a huge traffic jam on the road that Kang Hyun was driving on. Kang Hyun was angry that he even forgot about Kim Sun-woo because of that freak Jung In-hyun. But there will still be an opportunity to meet. At this time, the rest of the guild members lied to the head that Kim Sun-woo volunteered to become the bastard's guide. The guy denied everything and said it was a lie. He asked for mercy and promised to do anything. But Young In-hyun killed the guy in cold blood. How could such a pathetic worm and traitor hope to survive? With one blow, he threw the dying guy into the dungeon doors. After that, Jung In-hyun called his deputy over, and he ordered to find out who and what this bastard is. And Young In-ho himself has already put Kang Hyun under surveillance. The white car followed the guy's car. No one dares talk to the guild head Jung In-hyun like that. I wonder what he will sing if something happens to his loved ones. If he doesn't understand in an amicable way, Young In-hyun will simply press him by the balls. Let's see how long he lasts. Kang Hyun and his sister were having lunch at a restaurant. Achin admitted that her brother had succeeded after all. He asked his sister when she was in the hospital and what the doctor said. According to the doctor, the mother should wake up soon. The sister noted that his brother smiled at this news. And it's not about that psychopath's smile that hasn't left his face for a long time. Kang Hyun felt the urge to go to the toilet and left his sister at the table. When he returned, he saw a man standing near their table. Seeing Kang Hyun, the man finished and left. Kang Hyun decided that his sister was already picking on the boys, but Aiken was surprised. "Isn't this your brother's acquaintance?" "This guy asked me to give him a note." The note contained a message from Jung In-hyun, who expressed the hope that the guy would remember his proposal. After dinner, the brother and sister returned home, but Aiken wanted more beer and decided to go to the store. But Kang Hyun told her to go home. He will buy everything himself. He left the store and walked home along the deserted street. What did Jung In-hyun come up with, and why is he interfering with his family? Maybe I should stop going to dungeons for now and spend time with my sister. But she goes to work. It is unlikely that they will openly threaten her there. The phone rang and Kang Hyun accepted a call from his father. The father reported that his mother had woken up. She needs care but will recover. Kang Hyun's friend came to visit her. The guy didn't understand which friend his father was talking about. He replied that his friend's name was Jung In-hyun, and he asked to say hello to the guy. This information made Kang Hyun feel bad. He became furious. The next day, at the behest of the awakened school, 2 girls went to classes. The female teacher, Shin Sung, treated the girls to coffee. The girls started talking about the awakened one, and Min thought that they were all strange. Someone can break an opponent's arm during sparring. Someone has the face of a bandit. At this time, Kang Hyun approached them, scaring the girls half to death with his appearance. He said that he was looking for Kim Yi-hyun. Do they know where he is? The girls replied that he was only here when he was on duty as an instructor. He's not here now. Kim Yi-hyun was reporting to work as an instructor at this time. The level of the dungeons that appear increases, so it is important to attract people with abilities. Some noise was heard in the corridor, and an employee came and called Kim Yi-hyun out of the office. There was a small commotion in the reception area, and it seems that it was caused by an acquaintance of Kim Yi-hyun. When Kim Yi-hyun told Kang Hyun that they would meet soon, he didn't think it would happen this way. For what reason did the guy come to him? In such a way that the Temptation Guild began to pursue his loved ones in order to put pressure on him. And Kang Hyun needs someone who will protect his family until he himself deals with these rats. Kim Yi-hyun wondered what this guy had done, that he was attacked by an entire guild. She has a bad reputation, but there is no evidence against them, so nothing can be done about it. Kang Hyun grinned. That's why he was going to smash these scum. This will benefit everyone. Kim Yi-hyun did not understand why the guy addressed him. Because he belongs to the Dangun Guild? Kang Yi-hen replied that his interlocutor was the strongest person he knew. Kim Yi-hyun asked, "What does he think about An Yun-sung?" Kang Hyun thought about it. Who would trust such an idiot to protect his family? However, he doesn't even have Yun-seong's number. He continued to insist that he was asking for family protection for 1 week, and he will pay generously for it. Kim Yi-hyun didn't want to brag, but he earned more than enough money. Still, the post of deputy head of the guild was well paid. If a guy wants to interest him, then he needs to offer him something more interesting than money. Kang Hyun imagined something more interesting and blushed. This idiot wants his beautiful body? He moved away from his dangerous interlocutor just in case. Kim Yi-hyun choked. I dread to think what would come into this idiot's head. Therefore he voiced his request. If everything goes well, Kang Hyun should meet with the Dangun guild leader. In this case, they will be able to help him at the guild level. In the end, 5 guards were stationed inside and outside Kang Hyun's parents' room, and 5 were patrolling his sister's place of work. Kang Hyun was amazed by Kim Yi-hyun's coolness. He thought it was better to play it safe. They were sitting in a car near the building where the Temptation Guild was located. Kim Yi-hyun doubted whether Kang Hyun should go there alone. There are a lot of people there. Compared to the Dangun Guild, Temptation's dimensions were much smaller, but Kim Yi-hyun dispelled doubts. The strength of the guild is not determined by the size of the building. These guys have conquered a lot of dungeons, and that means something. Kang Hyun gave Kim Yi-hyun the floppy disk, and he asked his partner to park his car at the house. He couldn't explain everything now, but by tomorrow he would return alive and well. To gain time, Kang Hyun had already contacted the Temptation Guild, and was greeted at the door with open arms. The guy at the door asked why there were so many people greeting him. Are they going to test him? Jung In-hyun smiled. What is the guy talking about? From that moment on they are family and everyone came out to welcome the new family member. Kang Hyun bowed in response, internally bursting with anger. Family. Yes, these are more like shackles. He activated his lion's roar of fury and unleashed a magical explosion. He sent a powerful blast straight into the floor of the building. The guild members could barely stand on their feet, and the building shook. Jung In-hyun understood that the idiot wanted to bring down the floor. But why does he need it? At the bottom, the floor is reinforced with steel rebar. Kang Hyun knew this very well. He drew his sword. Wayne's secret. Giant strength and one strike. 2 halves. All these techniques mixed together and crashed onto the reinforcement. She could not stand it. The floor collapsed and some people flew down. Kang Hyun failed with them. A minute later, he stood up from under the rubble of concrete and stones. The effect of the antshell skill was very good. There wasn't a scratch on the guy. He was called from behind by Jung In-hyun, who was walking towards the guy as if nothing had happened. He asked him to show prudence. It's not too late for them to become good partners. Kang Hyun's eyes widened. What the hell is this guy talking about? He's already crossed the line. Jung In-hyun apologized for visiting Kang Hyun's family. Here they went too far. But if they join forces, they can even overthrow Dangun. They will be able to show Han Sen, who has her nose in the air, where she belongs, and they will be able to easily defeat her. Jung In-hyun continued that there are more than 200 guild members inside this building alone, and there are many times more throughout the country. They only lack one thing, the face of their guild. Such a strong man who will lead the people. And then the guild will be able to go beyond Korea and expand to the whole world. Kang Hyun did not listen to such speeches anymore. He simply spat in the face of his enemy. All his wishes sound like the nonsense of a notorious teenager. Jung In-hyun's face changed. This was to be expected. Such low-grade trash cannot understand his great plans. Kang Hyun burst out laughing and asked the guild members who were standing upstairs, did they hear the nonsense their boss was talking about? Looks like a medieval nobleman. Jung In-hyun is fed up with this arrogant boy. He doesn't have long to talk with his tongue, and he gave the order to kill the bastard. A block of magic and technique confusion flew from above towards Kang Hyun, and also darkness and perception breakdown. The guild members tried their best. The place where Kang Hyun stood was shrouded in a dense cloud of magic and power. The strong mind ring protected Kang Hyun from mental attacks. He activated Lion's Roar of Fury and advised everyone to shove their skills up their ass. All the stats and morale of the enemies surrounding Kang Hyun were lowered. The opponents were at a loss. Jung In-hyun was outraged that his subordinate stood rooted to the spot. He repeated the order to kill the boy. Even stronger spells flew at Kang Hyun, who stood motionless. He just wanted to check how the antshell copes with magic. The guild fighters began to jump down and attack the guy, but Kang Hyun was too fast for them, and many were injured before they could even land. Flashes of power from the guy's sword illuminated the entire space. Jung In-hyun was furious. He called on everyone to go on the attack. The Temptation Guild building was rocked by a powerful explosion. When the flames died down, Kang Hyun stood among the heaps of wounded and dead, clutching his sword. Jung In-hyun laughed as if nothing had happened, and asked Kang Hyun, "What's the problem?" "The guy is a killer just like them." Kang Hyun advised the guild leader not to push his guilt. "If you get into the habit of killing people, be prepared to die yourself." Jung In-hyun expressed confidence that Kang Hyun would die here. No matter how much he pretends, everyone understands that he is already at the limit. At that moment, huge tentacles jumped out from under the floor, which tightly wrapped themselves around Kang Hyun, preventing him from moving. And at that moment, a fighter who had crept up from behind pierced Kang Hyun with a sword. Kang Hyun realized that this was the end, and praised himself for holding out for a long time. Jung In-hyun praised his deputy, and decided that he himself would finish off this idiot. Jung In-hyun was impressed by Kang Hyun's resilience. He received so many wounds, but was still breathing. The guild leader would gladly trade the guy for all the trash that is gathered here. But animals that cannot be controlled are useless. Does the guy have any last words to say? Kang Hyun wholeheartedly sent Jung In-hyun away. The guild leader put his hand on the guy's face, which became red hot. Kang Hyun was engulfed in flames and the guy screamed in pain. Jung In-hyun finished the job, turned away and calmly lit a cigarette. It was all over. The deputy said they had 30 dead and over 50 wounded. Because of one idiot, such losses, his boss got angry. He ordered to take away the equipment of the dead man. It was expensive and partially compensate for the losses. But to the amazement of everyone present, the body disappeared without a trace. Aiken patiently revived her brother in their apartment. Judging by the way he left the room, he died again. The brother was hungry and wanted to chew something. 2 days later, 2 fighters were on duty near the dungeon of the Temptations Guild in Cake Gorge. They were bored. Nobody came to them. Everyone had heard about their guild and did not contact them. It wasn't even a matter of losing equipment. You could have lost your life. But then the guy became wary. Someone was walking towards them. It was impossible to find out who it was. The visitor was wearing a mask. He stopped in front of the guys. They looked at each other. What kind of crazy person came to them? After such a spontaneous performance in the guild, Kang Hyun realized that his actions were no different from throwing eggs at a stone. Of course, he has an infinite number of eggs, but he can't constantly receive penalties for resurrections. It would be easier to destroy enemies individually. The doors to the dungeon were already open. Kang Hyun decided to invade the guild's dungeons and clear them out one by one. The guards have already fallen into Kang Hyun's clutches. Kang Hyun threw the last one to the ground, and he demanded that he write a list of all the dungeons owned by the guild. He readily began to write everything he knew. Kang Hyun had a question. They have already killed so many people. How come they haven't been caught yet? Did they bribe the police? The guy replied that he was a small fry in the guild and did not know the details. Perhaps the fact is that they occupy those dungeons where there are no surveillance cameras. The fighter wrote down everything he knew, and Kang Hyun destroyed it without hesitation. He didn't need witnesses. The news reported that monsters had broken free in the popular guild building. The guild studied them for the future of humanity. Jung In-hyun was furious. He had to use a similar excuse to hide the incident as something abnormal. The office door opened, and the supervisor told the head that they had a problem. Jung In-hyun screamed, and he threw an ashtray at the person who came in. Who said you could walk in on him like that without knocking? And so the mood is lousy. The deputy, trembling, said that the bastard who only robs the guild dungeons has appeared again. They lost hundreds of guild members and the 7th dungeon. Jung In-hyun ordered to increase security and send every single one of them to the dungeons. Sleep in shifts. After the deputy left, Jung In-hyun began to think. Almost days have passed since Kang Hyun's attack. First, his body disappeared somewhere. And 2 days later, attacks on their dungeons began. Too many coincidences. Does Kang Hyun really have accomplices? One thing is not clear. Did he hide his body using a skill? There is not enough information to respond. He had nothing left to do and took out his phone. At the other end, the man replied that he had not heard Chong Yi-hyun's voice for a long time. The voice sounded mocking. Chong Yi-hyun said through clenched teeth that he needed help. The interlocutor laughed and said that recently the Temptation Guild has been the only thing in the news. But what will he get for his help? He doesn't need money. Jung In-hyun replied that he would get a great battle. He likes hot contractions, and their problem is very unusual. His interlocutor said that he would check this information. He replaced one guild fighter at the dungeon gate. It was boring to stand, and the man was making fun of his temporary partner and being rude to him. When will this unusual boy appear? If he waits for so long in vain, it won't be fun at all. The second guard was silent. Suddenly, footsteps were heard in the darkness, and someone approached the gate. The guy felt himself filled with strength. This was the first time that his special ability, sixth sense, reacted so strongly. Before that, she was just fluttering sluggishly. And now it's screaming deafeningly, and that means only one thing. You need to immediately run away from this monster if he doesn't want to die here. Thinking this, the guy pulled out a mace from his inventory. The guy who came up saw the guy and widened his eyes. What did he forget here? And Yun-sung heard a familiar voice and was also dumbfounded. Brother Kang Hyun, is that you? A smile appeared on Yun-sung's face. So it was Kang Hyun who killed all these guys? Well, he's having fun in his free time. Various thoughts were flying through Kang Hyun's head. Ihan told him that there was someone bigger behind the Temptation Guild. Yun-sung is clearly from a rich family. Is his family really protecting the guild? He put a sword to Yun-sung's throat and directly asked if he was working for Temptation. Yun-sung was surprised. Who does his brother take him for? Does it stand on par with such rubbish? Does Kang Hyun know Jung In-hyun? This is his guild. And when some bandit, who thinks a lot about himself, begs for help, it's so funny. Kang Hyun accepted his comrade's explanations. Then there are no questions for him. Let him not interfere. Yunsun suggested having lunch together sometime and turned to leave. Kang Hyun walked towards the dungeon, thinking that he still doesn't know Yun Seong's number. Yunsun suddenly attacked his brother from behind. At the last second, Kang Hyun managed to block a strong blow. He turns to Yun Sung, who said it would be too boring. Kang Hyun turned to Yun Sung and entered the fray. Sword and mace crossed, wrapped in the power of both opponents. Kang Hyun grumbled that the guy might have missed his friend, but now he will have to die. Hyunsun replied that he was ready 10 times, but he offers to give it his all in this fight. Kang Hyun activated giant strength and Wayne's secret technique, and he attacked Yun Seong, who immediately dodged the blow. In Yun Sung's opinion, Kang Hyun has become an even bigger monster than he was, and it was amazing. They grappled, and sparks from their powers and skills flew in different directions. Hyunsun was delighted with the fight. This is what he has been missing all this time. On the contrary, Kang Hyun didn't give up this fight. He needed to finish it quickly, but to his surprise, he had not experienced such delight in battle for a long time. Hyun Sung liked the expression on his opponent's face. Of course he enjoys it too. We must continue. Here a second fighter intervened in the fight and ran with a sword in his hands, intending to kill Kang Hyun. If he does this, he will be richly rewarded. Hyun Sung's mace threw the guy away from Kang Hyun. Kang Hyun did not expect this development of events at all. The bloodied fighter fell near the dungeon gate. He was killed on the spot. Hyunsun complained that this scarecrow wanted to interrupt such fun. It's my own fault. Kang Hyun was taken aback. What kind of allies are these? Hyun-sung killed this guy so easily. Hyunsun hid the mace in his inventory. He lost all mood to fight, and he wanted it so much. He still wants to, but he can't allow his brother to hate him. Kang Hyun thought that Yun-sung was already annoying him beyond belief, and Yun-sung continued that he hoped that his brother had already realized what a brute Jong In-hyun was. Kang Hyun agreed with his friend's conclusions. This asshole is the illegitimate son of the chairman of a large company. That's why he behaves this way. Kang Hyun lost his temper. Are they in a TV series? Yun-sung wants to say that it's better not to mess with this son of a bitch because of his family? If he could be scared like that, he wouldn't even start. Let Yun-sung not get involved in this matter, but go home and go to bed. Hyunsun stopped the guy. What a habit of not listening to the end. He wants to join Kang Hyun. It will be interesting to see how Jung In-hyun gets mad. Jung In-hyun was really furious. His scream could be heard on all floors of the guild building. 3 more dungeons have been looted, and Yun-sung is not answering calls. What useless bastards, they can't kill one bastard. He announced a general gathering of all guild members for tomorrow at 8 o'clock. The deputy replied that he was not sure that he would be able to gather many people. Jung In-hyun yelled that he didn't care about the reasons. Illness, death of relatives, everyone should be here. The deputy replied that more and more members of the guild were leaving. Many cannot be contacted. The boss shouted that it was necessary to take their relatives hostage and threaten them. Those who do not obey must be forced to obey. The deputy was sweating. Now the situation is unstable. If you threaten your own people, a lot can happen. Jung In-hyun was at a loss. His phone rang. The subscriber's number was unknown. Jung In-hyun recognized the voice that asked if it was true that he had a lot of trouble lately. In-hyun thought that things might be simpler than he thought. There was active discussion on social networks that the Temptation Guild had suddenly collapsed. Hyun-sung was glad that although Kang Hyun had only been doing this for a week, the effect was already evident. Kang Hyun believed that it was time to put an end to all this. Hyun-sung regretted it. It was fun. And what kind of ending awaits the guild? Kang Hyun whispered in his friend's ear what he had come up with, and Yunsun realized that his brother had completely gone crazy. Jung In-hyun was holding a letter in his hands, in which the noble robber invited him, if he wants to save his guild, to come to the dungeon forest of Disrupins on Mount Seososan tomorrow at 6 in the evening. Jung In-hyun crumpled the letter. Let this nit come. Let's see what he can do in the open field. He will hang his skull in his office. The entire guild approached the dungeon gate. Many said that they did not want to go, but they were forced. Jung In-hyun understood that he had to take so much garbage into the case, and all because of that asshole that Jung In-seong had a phone conversation with. The caller said that he is ready to lend a helping hand if Jung In-hyun is in trouble. Jung In-hyun rejoiced. He didn't know how to contact this guy, so he asked Yun-sung for help. This one can definitely do everything. He thanked the guy for calling and saying that if he helps, then In-hyun will not be in debt. His father will take care. The interlocutor did not let him finish and got angry. Who will take care of whom? It seems they didn't understand him. He changes his mind and washes his hands. Let Jung In-hyun rely on his wonderful father. In vain, Inkin shouted into the phone so that the interlocutor would not interrupt the conversation. Now Jung In-hyun stood in front of the dungeon and scolded that guy at all costs. He is even worse than An Yun-sung. The letter burned in In-hyun's hand. A recent interlocutor of Jung In-hyun listened to a report from an employee who said that the Temptation Guild had called all its employees, and even its head went. The employee asked if the boss was going to send help to the allies. Mr. Choi Min-jun had no intention of helping anyone. No more reason to help this trash. The employee replied that if Jung In-hyun died, that his father, Jung Sang-soo, would not be left behind. Immediately, an iron ring of power grabbed him by the throat and lifted him up. The employee was choking. Min-jun asked if he had to grovel before this old man. He loosened his grip and the guy fell onto the sofa. His boss told him to go do his job and attract new projects for financing. The Temptation Guild entered the D-rank dungeon of the Disruption Forest. The time was 6 hours 3 minutes. The person who called them was late. Jung In-hyun was angry. He ordered everyone to be on alert. It is unknown how many enemies there are and whether there is an ambush. There was an explosion not far from them, which attracted everyone's attention, and Kang Hyun jumped out of the clouds of dust. This made a stunning impression on the entire guild. Someone suggested that he was seeing a double. Chung Yi-hyun understood that this was a real living bastard. Kang Hyun happily greeted his opponent and asked how he was doing, and he has a present for him here. He raised his hand high, in which sat a cute little creature that looked like a kitten. This cutie was a disrupin cub. Kang Hyun swung and with a deft borsk sent the animal towards the guys from the guild. The fighters were horrified by what kind of psycho they had to meet, so abandoned this sweet creature. One of them threw his spear to the ground, and he stretched out his hands to catch the baby. Disrupin flew straight into the fighter's hands without receiving any damage. He blushed with tenderness. "It's okay, Daddy will protect the little one. He's so cute, I want to cuddle him." The rest of the fighters expressed their disdain for Kang Hyun for mistreating the cute little animals, until Jung In-hyun told them to shut up. He understood that this psycho kidnapped the cubs, and now the damn evil Disrupins. They are rushing after him to restore justice and take the children. Kang Hyun didn't stop. He threw a whole bag towards the guild, full of cute creatures. Arranging an unusual rain of lovely creatures, Kang Hyun quickly jumped up, leaving the place where he had just been standing, and angry wild animals were already flying towards the guild members and appearing. Jung In-hyun barely had time to build a protective barrier, and the bastard Kang Hyun wished him good luck and ran away. Jung In-hyun was furious. He had difficulty joining the fight. Disrupins are already difficult to deal with due to their ability to become invisible, and the bastard also disrupted the guild with his explosion. Jung In-hyun gave the command to retreat, and everyone to leave the dungeon. All the fighters rushed to the portal. Many swore that they would leave this guild tomorrow, but a surprise awaited them. An Yun-song appeared from the portal, who was already taking out his mace. The first fighter to run up to the portal was killed on the spot. The carnage began in earnest. Jung In-hyun recognized Yun-seong. He betrayed them. But when did this happen? This is a complete failure. Maybe there is some other way? Jung In-hyun looked at the battlefield. On the one hand, at the portal, Yunsun was killing his people, and on the other, the monsters and Kang Hyun were doing great. Since things have turned out this way, it's time for drastic measures. Kang Hyun had just destroyed another enemy, but there were a lot of them. He's already fed up. A thunderous cry caught his attention. Jung In-hyun screamed his name. Shrouded in flames, Jung In-hyun flew towards his enemy. Since everything turned out this way, she will take him with her. The self-immolation skill did not give anyone a chance to survive. The flames were so strong that they also engulfed some of the fighters. This skill was dangerous to Jung In-hyun's life due to its colossal power, but if this bastard died with it, he grabbed his enemy's head with his burning hand. But despite the fact that the flame enveloped Kang Hyun, it did not bring him much harm. The guy mockingly asked, "Jung In-hyun thinks he is cold and decided to warm him up?" A powerful stream of force threw Jung In-hyun aside. The flames died down. In-hen sat next to the body of the killed monster and could not move. Kang Hyun said that after everything that happened, they can't just break up. Let the bastard sit and watch while he kills his henchmen. Jung In-hyun knew that this was the end. It's all over because of one creep they got involved with. He laughed a mad laugh. The battle is over. There were people and monsters lying on the ground. Jung In-hyun continued to laugh when Yun-sung and Kang Hyun approached him. He knew it was all over, but he couldn't believe it. He can't die like this. He was an illegitimate child, a bastard, an unexpected offspring of a mistress. Strangers were always closer to him than his brothers and sisters, who looked at him as if he were nothing. But at the same time, they were constantly involved in the struggle for power. The father felt sorry for him and supported his son, and this was a reason for the others to bite him even more painfully. But one day the world changed. Dungeons and awakened ones appeared. Training appeared. At this time, Kang Hyun's sword interrupted Jung In-hyun's monologue and killed him. The guy was not going to listen to the sob stories of his enemies. He thanked Yun-sung for his help. Hyunsun asked how his brother felt when he took his revenge. Some say they felt empty after that. Kang Hyun scratched his chin. He simply took out trash that belonged in a landfill. What feelings can you experience from this? Relief. Kang Hyun decided to collect the belongings of the dead and sell them. Until now, he didn't really care about money. What he received after clearing dungeons was enough for him. But now he realized that he could not protect what was dear to him with force alone. So it doesn't hurt to get money and power. He asked a friend if he decided to create his own guild. Hyunsun didn't even listen to the end and replied that he agreed. His instincts tell him that Kang Hyun's guild will be a lot of fun. Kang Hyun replied that he just asked, and Hyunsung replied that he understood that his brother was testing the waters. Back then, no one suspected that the small guild, created by two men as a joke, would become the most famous in Korea. Of course, in the bad sense of the word. Hansok Group Chairman Young Sang-soo yelled at Choi Min-jun. He was responsible for the promotion of his son, Jung In-hyun, and now he has broken the agreement. Choi Min-jun did not react to these screams. What is a breach of contract? Is this some kind of joke? Jung Sang-soo could not contact either his son or the members of his guild for a week. Choi Min-jun didn't see anything special about it. What can you expect from a piece of trash with no abilities who was made the head of the guild on a whim? And Choi Min-jun has already earned his money. Jung San-soo turned green with anger and ordered his men to kill this impudent man. Several people attacked the man. Loops of force grabbed the attackers by the throat, and the people hung in the air, gasping and unable to move. Choi Min-jun slowly stood up from his seat and approached the chairman. He said he fulfilled the terms of the contract to the best of his ability. What are your complaints about him? His face moved menacingly closer to the face of Chairman Young San-soo. If this happens again, Choi Min-jun won't let it go so easily. The chairman was at a loss for words. Finally, he croaked that he understood everything. Choi Min-jun smiled and released the people, who fell to the floor with relief. Choi Min-jun was glad that they came to an agreement and waited for the promised money until the end of the day. Although deep down he was curious about who was able to beat Jung In-hyun. The Temptation Guild has fallen. Such a sudden disappearance of a huge guild gave rise to many rumors and speculations. But as a result of the emergence of new guilds, news about it began to surface less and less, and then was completely lost. Kang Hyun and Yoon Sung were pleased that no one found out anything and that no problems were expected. In addition, they improved greatly in battle. Everything turned out very well, and Hyunsun didn't understand why his brother had such a sour face. Kang Hyun admitted that the problem was the title he received from the system. Cruel Destroyer. He received it for killing and harming many creatures. The holder of the title evokes a feeling of fear in those around him. Kang Hyun was already stressed because of how people were reacting to him lately. And because of this crap, the misunderstanding will only increase. Hyunsun advised his friend not to worry. He's a terrible monster even without titles. You can't see the difference at all. Kang Hyun's phone rang. Kim Ye-hyun called him. He asked if Kang Hyun remembered their agreement. Of course, Kang Hyun didn't remember anything. Kim Ye-hyun said he thought so. The guy needs to meet with the leader of their guild and would like to organize this as soon as possible. Kang Hyun arrived at the Dangun Guild office. In the elevator, he asked if he could take Hyunsun with him. Kim Ye-hyun replied that the leader had given her permission. Hyunsung knew Han-sen and called her little sister. This sounded scary to Kang Hyun. Hyunsung replied that they met at a cultural event. Kang Hyun frowned even more. Is she also one of the rich? Is he the only one fluttering overboard? They entered Han-sen's office. The woman greeted them warmly and introduced herself to them. They shook hands and Han-sen said that she had heard a lot about the guy from Kim Ye-hyun. Kim Ye-hyun went about his business, and Kang Hyun sat down in a chair and thanked Han-sen for his help. He will definitely repay the debt. He immediately got to the point and asked why the guild leader wanted to see him. Han-sen directly asked if Kang Hyun would like to join the Dangun Guild. Without hesitation, Kang Hyun answered categorically no. He of course owes a debt to the guild, but he would like to repay the debt in some other way. If they need any of his help, they can turn to him. Han-sen didn't pay any attention to the guy's refusal. It's already good for them that her guild owes such a strong awakened one. They will contact him if necessary. He asked Kang Hyun how long he thinks this calm will last. The guy thought about it. They now live in a world where dungeons have appeared, and crime is rampant. All people are like on a powder keg. Compared to the 8th degree of learning, the current world is truly in a state of calm before the storm. Kang Hyun reached out and replied that he didn't know and didn't care. Worrying about it will not solve the problem. The only way to prepare for the future is to become stronger. Earth still has 5 years before connecting with the Haken dimension. Han-sen replied 3 years. In just 3 years they will be in danger. Time is running out. Kang Hyun was surprised. How does she know this? Han-sen could not tell everything, but there is one entity that knows everything thoroughly. They have an awakened one in the guild who can dialogue with her. Kang Hyun decided that we were talking about the Dimension Administrator. And is there a person who is able to communicate with him? Hansen said that the level of the dungeons is getting more difficult, and the level of the awakened ones is lagging behind. Kang Hyun was sure that this did not apply to him. Hyunsun intervened in the conversation. He recalled the famous phrase, "Everything that doesn't kill you makes you stronger." Firearms do not kill monsters. Kang Hyun thought that there really were no awakened people with firearms. Hyunsun continued that crossbows and bows have proven themselves to be excellent. There are many theories about this. Hansen confirmed Yunsung's words and added that only those who are active in new conditions can become as strong as Kang Hyun. The guy could very well become a hero. Kang Hyun became embarrassed. Actually, he is not a very kind person. What he did to the Temptation Guild is known. Hansen replied harshly that she didn't care about this trash. They would still not help in any way in the matter of saving humanity. Therefore, they do not deserve to be protected. The world is protected not by saints, but by the strong. After the guys left, Kim Yi-hyun entered the office. He asked how Hansen felt about meeting Kang Hyun in person. She replied that they were not what she expected. For a moment, when she talked about the Dimension Administrator, she thought Kang Hyun's eyes trembled. But it was only a moment. This guy has clearly completed his training. Hansen thought about it. There is only one letter difference between E and D rank dungeons, but it is colossal. Of course, the strength and number of monsters has increased, but the most obvious change was the variety of monsters in the dungeon. For example, the D-rank dungeon Dason's Laboratory. The variety here is off the charts. Kang Hyun walked through the dungeon among the bodies of monsters. Initially, the monsters, no matter whether it was a boss or an ordinary monster, were of the same type, so it was easy to fight them. And when the monsters are different, then you have to sweat. After all, their weaknesses and attacks are also different. His thoughts were broken by a new instance, which made Kang Hyun feel unwell. Ogre Chimera Erg, who seeing the man growled unfriendly. Kang Hyun raised his head high to look at the freak. They attached a goblin's head to the orc's carcass? He looked at the monster skeptically, and invited him to join the guild. He and Yunsun argued who would bring the newbie in first. The giant did not engage in conversation. He raised his huge axe over his head, which crashed into the place where Kang Hyun stood with such force that stones flew in different directions. But Kang Hyun was no longer in this place. Jumping from the air, he attacked the monster. Kang Hyun was indignant. If the freak doesn't want to join the guild, he could just say no. The monster growled in anger throughout the entire dungeon, and he spat acid on the impudent man. But a magical explosion stopped his attack. Kang Hyun quietly jumped over the giant and ended up behind him. The unharmed monster turned to his enemy. Kang Hyun noted that their weight categories are different, and the monster's skin is clearly not simple. But the guy already knew the answer thanks to his bright little head. He'll just take the freak's hammer away from him. People who entered the dungeon were surprised who was screaming so loudly. Someone must be hunting. You shouldn't pay attention to this. It's better to concentrate on what's in front of them. But the sounds were really strange. People became wary. Someone was coming towards them. Kang Hyun walked slowly towards them, dragging a huge axe behind him. He grumbled that these were just the sounds of hunting. What's strange about that? And he also smells a strange smell here. Has anyone really shit themselves out of fear? The company silently looked at the idiot. What is he carrying? Is this some kind of hammer? Kang Hyun picked up his trophy and swung it. The giant's strength helped him in this. Stones fell from the walls and people jumped back in fear. Is the idiot out of his mind? Swinging such a thing in a tight space. Kang Hyun brought the hammer down to the ground as hard as he could. The walls of the dungeon shook. People drew their weapons just in case. Kang Hyun didn't pay any attention to them. He assessed the trophy as too bulky. It is inconvenient to use it as a main weapon. He put the hammer away in storage. He doesn't need this weapon yet. The leader of the group silently watched the guy, and said with irony that he even began to anticipate something interesting from such a spectacular start. But the idiot clearly realized that he was doing garbage. And now he is unarmed. The group leader attacked Kang Hyun with his sword. And now he will die. The striker was already anticipating victory. Kang Hyun responded with one quick, sharp punch, and the attacker's face changed dramatically. A second later, he was lying on the ground unconscious. When he came to his senses, he was already in the tenacious hands of Kang Hyun, who put a sword to his throat and turned to his accomplices so that they give him everything they found. But the group decided to resist. There's more than one idiot. A guy jumped forward with a spear in his hands. He shouted for everyone to go on the attack and kill the insolent man. Kang Hyun was amazed that these bandits had nothing sacred. They attack, although their comrade is hostage. He asked the hostage what his name was. He answered stutteringly, Kim Gusik. Kang Hyun grabbed Gusik. promised that he would avenge him, and threw the guy right at the attacker. Gusik's attack turned out to be very impressive. The attacker fell dead. Kang Hyun turned to the bandits and promised that the ram from Gusik would get everyone. Kang Hyun quickly dealt with the criminals who wanted to kill him. There's only one girl left, who unexpectedly thanked the guy. Thanks to him, she got rid of troubles. Kang Hyun replied that no thanks were needed. The girl introduced herself. Her name was Shin Sona. Kang Hyun told her his name and became embarrassed. The girl asked what needs to be done to become as strong as him. It was a historic moment when Korea's two worst scum were joined by a third. But more on that later.